This boy is seen as weak by everyone at the academy for being only level 1, and everyone laughed at him. But the truth is, he has a dark secret that no one knows. One day, he went to the academy's dungeon, where he would soon enroll as a new student. Portals have level requirements, and the guard warned him that only level 30 or higher could enter. But the boy simply ignored the warning, mockingly signed the registry, and walked in. Worried, the guard asked a group of senior students to follow him to ensure his safety. What the authority didn't know was that these guys loved dragging rookies into dungeons just to steal their valuable items and blame their deaths on the monsters. They accepted the order, seeing the lone rookie as a gift from the gods. However, as they went deep into the cave, they found an impossible scene. The so-called loser was walking calmly while wiping out an entire horde of D-rank monsters using devastating pillars of fire. The veterans are in shock, but they think that since there were so many monsters, the reward will be a fortune. Therefore, they decide to rob him. They attack all at once, shouting that the weakest must surrender everything to the strongest, even their own lives. As they launch their coordinated attack, the MC looks at them coldly and says he agrees with them. He then dodges every magic attack. It was as if he were rank A or higher. The leader of the veterans takes a blow to the stomach so overwhelming that he is sent flying several meters. It is unclear if he is still alive. The MC then looks at the others and warns them that the punishment will be the same for everyone. Kyosuke returns home and stares at his student. ID, he is no longer level 1. He is now level 27, and nobody knows it. That night, while he is at home, the hidden truth, which no one there imagines, is that he is the reincarnation of the most ruthless and powerful hunter who lived 20 years ago. One day, portals leading to dungeons appeared all over the world. Since then, creatures have been invading the continent, attacking all living beings. However, along with the portals, people awakened unique abilities to combat this evil. Two of the heroes, Ingolf and Claudia, were helping the people around them with their talents. While the rest of the group, the Golden Seekers, cleared a path on the battlefield, the team notices a vulnerable young man screaming as he tries to shield himself from a monster's attack. One of the girls yawns lazily, and one of the men tells her to go help the people already. Trembling, the boy cowers on the ground, having lost all hope. Suddenly, a powerful kick strikes the creature, sending it flying into a wall, which shatters on impact. A young man positions himself between the defenseless boy and his attacker. Laughing, he turns his head and asks if everyone is okay. With a smile, Masato says he'll take care of this one. A loud bang is heard as the hero leaps, concentrating his energy. His eyes glow with latent power, and in the blink of an eye, he dashes forward, striking all the enemies at once. His colleagues watch in astonishment at such strength and skill. Lee, one of the members, explains that with his time attribute, Masato can predict what the monsters will do in the future. But the way he fights makes it clear he's no longer human. The warrior flies from creature to creature, leaving a trail of energy behind him. After a long conflict, the city finally falls silent as the dust from the battle settles. The group gathers, heading toward the portal. With a swift slash, Masato eliminates the last remaining enemy. Relieved to finally bring peace to this place, he concentrates his energy to seal the portal once and for all. In shock, the warrior is struck from behind, breaking his spell. He is thrown backward, but regains his footing despite being injured. On the ground, the people he once considered his closest friends stare at him as a massive magic seal hovers in the air. The same fighter who exterminated an army of monsters with ease now faces the situation unable to move. Even with his power, Masato couldn't predict the betrayal, and had never felt so scared. Regaining his balance, the young man asks his team why they did it. "Why do you ask?" one of the men says, laughing. Nathaniel, with a smirk on his face, replies, "Precisely because you couldn't predict you'd be betrayed here." Masato stares at his former companions, speechless. The girls explain that with him being level 100 and so powerful, it was impossible for the group to make money easily. Iwako and Ingolf add that he only thought about saving people and that just put them at risk. The leader of the attack laughs, stating that today was the last time that would happen. "See you later," he says as he leaves with the team. Banging against the portal's barrier, Masato screams, begging them to set him free. As the leader of the Golden Seekers, he had always sought to protect the world and its people from the monsters. He remembers that none of his friends had taken the initiative to save the boy earlier. All his internal confusion had passed. All he could feel now was rage. His thoughts are interrupted by roars that shake the ground around him. Without hesitation, the fighter turns to defend himself, but is taken by surprise. It's far more than he could have expected. Dozens of grotesque beings stare back at him, hungry. The young man uses his future sight. Every decision he considers leads to the same outcome. The magic always says he will be defeated here. "So my future no longer exists," our hero says to himself with a bitter smile. He realizes it's no use that the creatures will not stop coming, and accepts that he truly cannot change the future he foresaw. Giving up the fight, the warrior accepts his fate. However, as he is thrown into the air, he gathers his last remaining energy and makes a decision. He will not be defeated like this. He will reincarnate and become stronger. He will reach his full potential and take revenge on his former companions. Using all his rage, the warrior unleashes his power. An energy never seen before erupts from the protagonist, illuminating the entire dungeon. With a scream that reverberates through the ground, he releases the magic once and for all. The sparks from that explosion slowly settle upon a young man sleeping in his bed. The boy sits up from his rest, startled. He stares at himself in the mirror, checking his own reflection. Masato, seeing his new body, smiles. Realizing the reincarnation worked, he recognizes the hospital as he's been there before. Frightened, he realizes he doesn't know what year it is and fears his revenge might be unattainable. Looking around for a sign, the young man notices something on the table. He finds the boy's ID, which indicates that 20 years have passed since the incident. Asai Kyosuke is now his new identity. This new body possesses the Void ability. The young man smiles, noting his luck, and can't stop laughing, thinking about how good this will be. In the past, Masato was feared mainly for his time ability, but no matter how strong he became, his power could never surpass the depth of the Void attribute. There was no doubt it was the strongest skill, but luckily, no one in his time possessed it. Because it's extremely rare, no one knows how to train it, and he notices that for this reason. The boy was still level 1. The protagonist reflects that the boy was probably ridiculed for barely having any enchantments. With a bow, the young man promises to honor the boy's name. Thanks to his previous clairvoyance ability, the warrior knows how to extract the true potential of Void. As the room fills with magic, he is certain he will become the strongest person who has ever lived. And as such, he will surely get his revenge on those who betrayed him. For our hero to get his revenge, he first needs to level up. He rests his head and concentrates, trying to remember how to control his ability. Thanks to his old clairvoyant skill, he knows the enchantment consists of controlling things that don't directly exist. In other words, this means the young man can project his imagination into reality. He knows that imagining is something anyone can do, but turning it into something real is complicated. Luckily, there is a perfect target for training. The young man focuses all his energy on his injured body. Gathering all his magic, he concentrates on each cell being healed. The young man's body begins to glow with a yellowish color, and in the blink of an eye, his wounds heal. Straightening his posture, Masato smiles upon seeing his body completely restored. Considering the nature of the ability, he realizes that on the inside, he is still a little hurt. The more our protagonist uses this ability, the faster he will level up. The higher his level, the more complex and powerful things he can create. When he reaches the peak of his strength, any image he thinks of can become reality. Pleased, he smiles at his own potential. A doctor enters the room surprised to see the young man finally awake. Frantically, he asks the boy to stay still as he is badly injured. Our hero silently obeys the man's request. The doctor laughs, saying that the mere fact he woke up seems like a blessing from the divinity. The young man questions the word divinity, not understanding. Shocked, the man stares at him, unable to comprehend how he could be unaware of the topic, and explains almost shouting about the divinity of the holy pentagram. The doctor says that since he just woke up, it's normal for him to be confused. As he leaves the room, the man says he will urgently prepare a series of tests to check on his patient's well-being. Our protagonist remains completely confused about the previous topic. Although leveling up is his priority, he cannot forget his other tasks. The young man needs to understand what time period he is in now. When he turns on the TV, he comes across a news report about the incident from 20 years ago. Without moving, he hears that the culprit of the incident was none other than himself. The commander of the Golden Seekers, Masato Kyoiro, had been responsible for the catastrophe. In disbelief, the boy jumps from his hospital bed, unable to understand how they could have twisted the story so much. The report continues, stating that the leader had foreseen the attack, but told no one in order to take advantage of the situation. For stopping the traitor, the 5 remaining members of the Golden Seekers are now known as the Holy Pentagram. Now, thanks to this feat, the new heroes lead the world in different ways. Our young man walks to the window, processing everything that has happened. He begins to laugh, desperate and in disbelief. His comrades not only betrayed him, but also threw all his dignity in the trash. His team destroyed everything he had built, and without a second thought accepted becoming the world's heroes. Trembling with rage, the boy cannot forgive what they did. There is no way for them to redeem themselves. The warrior promises himself that he will bring ruin to them all. A deafening silence covers the entire hospital. Coming to his senses, our hero controls his breathing to calm down. He knows he must now be careful with his actions. If his former group discovers he is alive and recovering, it will create a huge problem. After turning off the TV, he quickly grabs his phone. The young man searches for the gym where the body's previous owner trained. Relieved, the boy smiles after finding it. Just as he'd imagined. The boy trained at the Academy of Iwako, one of the members of the Holy Pentagram. The young man can't help but laugh, thinking how lucky he is to have already found a trail to one of them. Sitting up, the warrior begins to plan his next move. He knows Iwako is very cautious and that he'll need to be careful. Unfortunately, with the huge level gap between them, there's no chance for our strategist to defeat him now. His hopes dashed. He throws himself back onto the cot. As much as he wants to act and knows how, at level 1, he can do nothing but train. But he knows his chance will come. A few weeks of recovery and rest pass, straightening his posture. Our hero prepares to leave. The doctor reads the report, unable to believe how quickly he recovered from such serious injuries. The doctor wonders if it was a blessing from a deity. Silently, Masato knows it was all thanks to his own effort. Bidding the man farewell, our young man departs from the hospital. Now healed, he can finally take action. Thanks to his training, the young man has already reached level 27 on his own. Laughing, he wonders where he can find a dungeon to shake off the rust. After many years, the young man returned to the training institute. As he was walking, a girl called out Kyosuke's name. It was Asahi Karen, his classmate, who asked if he was feeling better. Our protagonist greeted her, feigning nonchalance, as she told him how worried she had been about her friend's well-being. As they were talking, a boy shouted, "Look who it is!" The skillless rookie decided to show his face. A group of students approached, saying that since they protected him, it was only fair they received something in return. "I could really use some cash," said the upperclassman, getting in our boy's face. Immediately, the protagonist recognized who had sent those threats on his phone. Before he could react, the girl stepped forward and told them to leave him alone. As much as she tried to look confident, she couldn't stop trembling. Noticing how scared his friend was, he thanked her for her help and took charge of the situation. The small group started laughing, mocking the weakling for acting tough just because a girl was watching. "Do I need to remind you that you can't even use magic properly?" one of the boys said without a change in expression. Kiosk told them to know their place. He had promised to honor the name of the young man whose place he had taken, and he was someone who definitely kept his promises. The student couldn't contain his rage at hearing this, and without a second thought began to cast his devastating spell. The girl tried to warn him that using magic outside of a dungeon was forbidden, but her warning was completely ignored in the heat of the moment. As all the moisture in the air evaporated, a fireball flew toward our hero. Keeping his composure, he focused his energy. In one fluid motion, he projected flames from one hand and swiftly launched an even more powerful attack at his aggressor. The attacks collided, causing a massive explosion. Completely shocked, the rest of the group couldn't understand how he was able to use the very same spell. As the smoke slowly dissipated, the fighters could see each other again. "Is that all you've got?" our prodigy asked in a mocking tone. Sweating, the veteran realized he stood no chance against the boy he once considered a weakling. He quickly asked his friends to help him out of the humiliating situation. His two companions prepared a joint attack and launched their spells. Once again, Kyosuke prepared the very same attacks being used against him, and without much effort hurled them back. As the spells were repelled, the team looked on in shock. After all, it was nearly impossible for someone like him to possess so many skills. Losing his patience, Kyosuke asked in a threatening tone, "Are you satisfied now?" Silence fell over the courtyard. Then, our young man began to prepare. Flames erupted from his fist, growing and illuminating the entire area. The academics fled when they saw what kind of monster they were dealing with. "What did you do when I asked for your help?" the boy said, grabbing one of the veterans by the shoulder. Paralyzed, the group's leader stared at him. Our young man grabbed his opponent's face. The flames grew ever larger around him as he said that worms like him always made excuses, trembling and breaking out in a cold sweat. The student faced his aggressor. As he delivered the blow, our warrior said that nothing would stop him from getting what he deserves. The air grew heavy and stifling as an attack of pure fire and energy struck him. Gasping for air, the academic took the full force of the blow. His breath knocked out of him. The shockwave threw the rest of the group aside while their leader was sent flying backward, landing unconscious on the ground. Smoldering, Karen stared at the scene, shocked by what Kyosuke had just done. Still afraid, the veterans helped pick up their unconscious friend. Proudly, our protagonist smiled, knowing that his path to becoming the strongest adventurer had truly begun. Silence descended upon the academy after the confrontation ended. As they carried their colleague, his friends fled the scene, apologizing for the incident. The boys remained stunned by how strong the newcomer had become while he was away. Sighing, our protagonist said that they weren't much of a challenge after all. Finally, the hero managed to enter the academy with his friend. However, his peace would not remain intact for long. As he walked, everyone stared at him with a mixture of fear and concern. Confused, he wondered if he had drawn too much attention to himself. Parting the crowd, someone approached the young man. Our protagonist heard a voice ask if his name was Kyosuke. The man asked if they could talk. Immediately, our boy recognized him as some kind of dean or supervisor. Shrugging, he said his class was about to start and tried to get out of the conversation. "By the way, I didn't get to tell you my name," the supervisor said before the boy could leave. "I am Yoichi Tsudai, the leader of Biting the Cat." In that instant, the girl recognized the name. That was the clan director Iwako had created. Kusuk froze. "Can you spare a moment of your time?" the man asked, his tone more threatening. Unfortunately, Kyuk knew he couldn't get out of this situation, but perhaps he could gain something from it. The young man laughed, saying that if that was the case, he had no choice. Sudai got straight to the point, questioning if he was the one who had defeated the adventurers in the rank dungeon the previous night. Without changing his expression, the student claimed he didn't know what he was talking about. Inwardly, however, he was confused. The dean shouldn't have been able to find that information. The man explained that he'd heard a student had entered the dungeon, so he had to investigate. Inside he found unconscious criminals known for attacking novices. With a grim look, he added that he had seen the freshman using multiple skills simultaneously at the entrance earlier. At that moment, rather than being frightened, our young man felt relieved that the dean didn't know his true skill, losing his patience. Sudai asked again if he was the one who had entered the dungeon. While taking something from his bag, our boy explained that since he was attacked that morning, he didn't remember what happened very well. And to top it off, he was only level 1. There was no way he could have done it. In shock, the man stared at the ID the young man handed him. The supervisor examined the card, which showed that the boy had nothing special about him. Angry, he stared in disbelief at how this nobody had managed to waste his time. Gritting his teeth, the dean lost his patience with the whole situation, apologizing for the trouble. He took his leave. Before leaving, Sudai told him not to act suspiciously in the future, as he found it a pain to work overtime. Our hero watched him as that little problem walked away. Without difficulty, the new prodigy had managed to escape the situation. Smiling, he realized he might have an opportunity to use that guy in the future. That man was the key to getting closer to Iwako without raising suspicion. Our young man knew that if he could make him his pawn, he would have a great weapon in his hands. And as luck would have it, this was the perfect moment to test a new enchantment. In another room, the dean finished reporting everything he had discovered in his investigation of the dungeon incident. An elegant gentleman remarked mockingly that it wasn't like Sudai to mess things up like this. Iwako reminded him that he had asked him to be careful when choosing who to use. With a bow, the dean apologized, promising he would resolve the situation. The man calmly rose from his armchair. In a threatening tone, the member of the Holy Pentagram said that if it became public that he was involved in the tactic of hunting novices, it wouldn't be good for him. Suddenly, the young man's jaw was gripped tightly as the nobleman pulled it. Energy filled the entire room, and the leader said that even though he was his subordinate, he could be discarded in the blink of an eye. Trembling and breaking out in a cold sweat, the dean agreed with the director. Inside, a burning hatred consumed Sudai for having to deal with this kind of humiliation. All he could think was that if he had known what was going to happen, he would have. Despite trying to hide it, his teeth ground in frustration. Returning to his desk, Iwako said there was one thing he still didn't understand. Confused, the young man looked at him. The old man explained that according to the report, the criminals were at least third years at the academy. However, the records showed that no student from that year had entered the dungeon last night. He propped his tablet on the desk as he turned slowly. The director pointed out that either the youths were defeated by monsters and Sudai was hiding it, or some other student did the job. He gazed out the window as he said that this was a much more reasonable conclusion. "Do you really think that's what happened?" the dean asked, nodding. His superior said there was no doubt. Iwako added that he was certain of his theory unless something extremely unusual had happened. Upon hearing this, the dean immediately recalled his meeting from earlier. Could a unique skill be involved? He asks his superior excitedly, scratching his head. The director says that would be plausible. The man smiles, relieved to have found the problem. Straightening his posture, he asks the leader to leave the matter to him. All Sudai can think about is how that boy managed to trick him. Beating a hand against his chest, he promises to resolve this issue. The only sound in the area was the crackling of the torches. Breaking the silence, a large explosion reverberated through the dungeon walls as senior students combined their skills. Dodging the spell's blast radius, a creature leaped beside one of the students. The whole class ran as the monster advanced on them. Circles of yellow energy lit up the entire area as a man focused his energy. The creature was struck by a spell fired at its back. Startled, the young students stared at the smoldering monster on the ground. The dean calmly told the students not to break formation. In awe and admiration, the boys stared at the director's chosen one. While others dreamed of joining his clan, the prodigy shouted, saying he had finished off all the monsters in that area. The students who were helping him gave a crooked salute in respect. Turning his back, the dean said he would leave the rest to them. Once far from the crowd, he prepared to do what he truly planned. The man took a magical artifact and held it in his hands, focusing his energy. He activated the object, commanding the chains to show Kioski's location. The dungeon filled with the jingling of the instrument as the chains flew through the air. As expected, the boy's location was far from his classmates. The supervisor ran in that direction. His plan to stage the student's disappearance in mind, he knew that if it happened, It wouldn't be anything out of the ordinary since many strange things had suddenly started to happen after Kai left the hospital. The man recalled what had occurred. First, the incident with the rookie in the dungeon, and then the fight that left the boy injured in the courtyard. He thought about the brief interrogation from the other day when he asked if what he had heard was true. The boys, desperate, had begged him to believe them, saying the skillless rookie had attacked them with the same enchantments they possessed. Just from remembering the incident, one of the students trembled and lost his breath, reporting that the boy had created a spell greater than any they had ever seen. Narrowing his eyes, the dean said there was no way he would believe that story. Standing up, the supervisor announced he had already asked what he wanted. Hopefully, the group's leader asked what he would do next. Turning around, the man told his own students to re-educate them, as he wouldn't allow weaklings like them who lose to incompetence. The young men tried to resist and go after the dean, but they were held back. However, something one of them said caught his attention. As he was being restrained, the boy said with difficulty, almost whispering that that kid had stopped being human. The dean still didn't believe the story, but the fear they felt as they spoke was not normal. To try and resolve his doubt, he had Kiosk attend a special class. But just like before, the boy used powerful illusions to disguise himself. The only possibility the supervisor could think of was that he had probably used some kind of magical item. Laughing, the dean wondered what kind of dirty trick the rookie had used to defeat those students. The body of a creature could be seen in the distance. The closer he got, the more defeated monsters he found along the way. He analyzed that they had all fallen to a single fire-based strike and astonished thought that maybe those stories weren't all lies. Even if they were true, the dean didn't fear the power of a mere freshman. Laughing, he thought that even the director could do that. He knew he couldn't question his superior, but he still hoped to surpass him one day. And once he surpassed him, he would take his place in the pentagram to reign in the world. His laughter echoed through the dungeon walls. However, he knew that for that to ever happen, he needed to hide his connection to the rookie hunters. Kioski was becoming a problem for him, so the supervisor knew what had to be done. The glowing artifact shook more and more violently, indicating he was approaching the target. Carefully, the man peeked around the corner to observe. Startled, his entire theory about what had happened crumbled. The young Kiosk sat on a pile of creatures, his menacing aura filling the entire area. Smiling, the protagonist said he was tired of waiting. The dean hid behind the wall, not understanding how he could have noticed his presence. "How did you notice my presence?" the hero asked mockingly before the dean could even finish his thought. Yoichi stared at him, not understanding how he could know what he was thinking. "What the hell are you?" he said as he walked slowly toward the boy. Kioski said he'd heard about the director's chosen one, but seeing him face to face, he didn't seem like much. Looking him straight in the eye, he added that the way Yoichi extorted money from the weak made him just as cowardly as Iwako. Stammering, the supervisor asked how he could possibly know that. The young man laughed as he stepped down from that pile. "It seems you enjoy this. But have you ever known what it's like to be the one who's hunted?" the warrior asked as he approached. "I'll teach you that feeling right now." Smiling, the young man thought that with his new power, he would make that opportunist dance. Frightened, the nobleman looked at the dangerous student, gritting his teeth, now face to face with his opponent. He focused his energy. A flaming sword formed in his hand, making the entire corridor feel suffocating, as the dean declared he would do anything for his ambition. In the blink of an eye, he shattered the floor beneath him and launched himself at his opponent. He delivered a fatal blow, but our hero dodged it with ease. "Is that all you've got?" the prodigy asked as a living flame appeared in his hand. The fireball seemed to come alive as he hurled it toward the supervisor, slicing the spell in half. Yuichi wondered if this was the true extent of his enemy's skill. As the fire scattered, a bolt of lightning shot out from the smoke. At the very last second, he blocked the bolt with his sword. As he was sent flying backward, the ground began to tremble beneath him, and spikes of sand erupted all around. With a single swift movement, he shattered the trap, stunned by the sheer scope of the student's abilities. The swordsman struggled to catch his breath. Just as he wondered what was wrong with the void ability, the dean felt a powerful surge of energy from behind. A quick glance back revealed the surprise attack, and at the very last instant, he managed to turn and block the rookie's blow. Iwako's disciples' patience ran out, and he declared that he wouldn't allow his plans to be interrupted. Lowering their swords, both men stepped back. Our protagonist paused for a moment and asked what plans he was talking about. The man replied that one day he would surpass, laughing. He continued saying that when he did, he would finally become a part of the sacred pentagram. The hero asked why he was targeting the director when there were other members of the pentagram. "Don't you know?" he asked with a smile. Yoichi explained that Iwako had been abandoned by the pentagram. The young dreamer explained that once he became a member, he could rule the world, so it only made sense to try and defeat their weakest link. Shaking his head, our hero looked at him with pity. He called his ambition despicable, infuriating his opponent. Our hero revealed he had even been worried that Yoichi would get to the director first. However, he added that with such a pathetic ambition, he wouldn't be a problem at all. No anger the dean had ever felt could compare to that moment. screaming for him to shut up. Yoichi lunged forward, his energy illuminating the entire area. As they traded blows, the young noble kept shouting, asking what was wrong with wanting power and money. The power he had always craved, the strength to ensure no one could ever tell him what to do. Completely out of control, he screamed that he wanted that power. Yoichi said that once he was part of the pentagram, not only could he do anything he wanted, but he would also know the other members' weaknesses. That meant he could take Borju for himself. Our protagonist calmly stated that his words weren't even worth listening to. He declared it was past time to end this as he struck his opponent's sword. Fallen to the ground, the dean watched the shards of his weapon fly through the air. The hero thanked him for the long-winded speech since his enchantment was finally ready. Desperate, the noble begged him not to come any closer. Before casting the spell, the prodigy said it was time to see him dance. As he held the dean's face, an explosion of colors filled the area and took over the man's mind. As the spell Absolute Hypnosis was cast, completely lost, and with a vacant stare, Yuichi became lost in his own mind. The colors began to dissipate, and along with them, so did the young man's consciousness. Our protagonist told him to stand up, heeding the command. The disciple's body rose unnaturally. "Yes, sir," the young man said in a mild tone. Satisfied, Kusuke gazed upon his handiwork. The prodigy told him to focus on the mission for now. Like a zombie, the dean agreed. Kusuke told him to go back to acting normally. In the blink of an eye, his former enemy calmly turned and went back to help his students. The enchantment he had used, though highly effective, required the target spirit to be broken first. Kusuke smiled, seeing that everything was going according to his plan. As he walked to leave the dungeon, rapid footsteps could be heard down the corridor. Asahi appeared, asking where her classmate had been. He shifted his stance as he replied that he and Yoichi had gone to talk. Confused, his friend asked what they talked about. The protagonist replied that it was just a conversation about how to make their dreams come true. His excited classmate asked if he gave any good advice, and he confirmed, saying that one of Yoichi's dreams would certainly come true. Happy, she said she hoped it would happen soon. As they were talking, the leader of the upperclassmen shouted, announcing that the special class was ending. With a smile, Asahi called for her friend to go with her. Now relieved, the young man was glad he had come to this class. Thanks to this, he had finally acquired the pawn he needed. The director asked if there had been any progress on the freshman incident. Placing a computer on the desk, the dean reported that there was, in fact, a student with a unique ability involved. He explained that the ability Void belonged to Asaiki, a first-year student. The young man reported that he had kept the student detained and that he confessed to defeating the other students using multiple abilities. Not understanding, the old director asked what that ability meant. Realizing the man was unaware of such a talent, the young man smiled, saying he didn't know either. But if he had the time, he could try to find out. Approaching the desk, the supervisor offered to take on the task. Stretching his neck, the upperclassman agreed it wasn't a bad idea. While cracking his knuckles, he commented that it had been a while since he'd interrogated someone and that it would be made good to make him pay for all the trouble he'd caused. Just as Yoichi started to reply, the phone rang, cutting the conversation short. With a dismissive tone, the director sighed and quickly sent the student away to end the matter. He answered the phone with an air of authority. A female voice on the other end of the line said, "Well, if it isn't my favorite director, I'm so glad you chose us after yesterday's proposal." Recognizing he was on a call with the CEO of lay companies, the old man told her to cut it out. Laroxy laughed, amused, saying he really hadn't taken the bait. The woman continued, saying that they were still partners and had to share the same scraps the government gave them. The director replied, leaning back in his chair, that the young woman truly never changed. But he was busy and couldn't talk business at the moment. What business could the great director who lines his pockets with the Academy's money be so busy with? She teased. Losing his patience, Iwako explained with contempt that he was investigating a student with the void ability. The woman asked why. After all, what could a failure with such an ability possibly do? Agreeing with her, the man retorted that it was still a unique talent, and because it was unique, anything could happen. Yep. Lele smiled, interested in the topic, and questioned if he was referring to something special, like Misato Koichiro's time ability. The director remained silent. After her question, the woman heard a shout and pulled the phone away from her ear. The director was yelling that the boy drove him crazy and that she shouldn't speak of this to anyone. "I see you still have that short temper, but I can't blame you," the woman said, laughing. Ever since the day Misato awakened his power, the balance of power between adventurers and monsters had completely shifted. She laughed as she recalled that time and said that if that was the issue, she would call back later. Lei bid him farewell with a chuckle. Iwako forcefully slammed the phone onto the table, ending the call. Even after all this time, just hearing that name was enough to set the old director off. This was the perfect moment for him to unleash his anger. The man walked through a dense forest. On his way to the shed, he wondered what to do with the rookie when he found him. His enchantment flowed to his fingertip as he touched the door. All his pent-up anger from Masato would be unleashed in that moment. A click was heard, signaling that the door had been unlocked. With a swift motion, the man pushed it aside. Upon entering, he apologized to Sudai for being late. To his shock, all he found were tools and dust. There was no one inside. Before he could process what was happening, his train of thought was abruptly cut short. Yoichi appeared behind his master, sword in hand. By the time he turned, the blade was already inches from his face. With one hand, the director caught the sword, stopping its movement instantly. As smoke rose around him, he said he had been greatly underestimated. He continued, saying that all that arrogance must have come from the fact that Sudai had been blessed. The old man stared at the boy as magic flowed between his fingers. "Did you really think you could defeat me?" The former saint spoke as glowing chains erupted from his hand, wrapping around the target. Before he knew it, the young man was completely immobilized, hanging upside down in the air. As he kicked his enemy, Iwako shouted that this was not even close to a worthy challenge for him. Falling to the ground, the apprentice rolled, still unable to move. Slowly, the director walked toward his former student, projecting a threatening aura. The man said that Yoichi Sudai had ruined himself with his foolish desires. The old man froze mid-stride upon hearing a voice behind him say that he was still an idiot. Turning around, he looked for the speaker. Our protagonist whispered that the director continued to grovel before the strong, while exploiting and using the weak. He added that the saint remained as greedy and foolish as he had always been. Angered, the director shouted at the student, asking how he dared to speak that way to the academy's director. However, the young man continued walking toward him. Red with rage, the old man shouted that it was a perfect description of the boy himself. Iwako asked who he thought he was, demanding his identity so he could expel him from the academy. Laughing, our hero asked his opponent to calm down. He said he had finally gotten where he wanted to be and proposed that since he had taken up his time, they should have a fight, just the two of them. "Why don't we have a little chat?" the young man asks in a joking tone. He then asks what Io Hideki thinks of the idea. Once again, energy crackles from Iwako's hands as he questions how the young man dares to make a fool of him. The ground trembles, sending dust rising in a column as rocks are lifted by the energy flowing into the surroundings. Clenching his fists, the saint declares that he will show him the true difference between their strengths. Hidekake's special attribute is invoked, and an immense hand of earth surges toward the shed. Confident that no student could dodge his strike, he casts his spell. "Give up," the man shouts, pointing his fist at the boy. In the blink of an eye, the gigantic fist is about to strike the young man. The blow lands and a massive explosion erupts, sending a thunderous roar across the clearing. Laughing uncontrollably, the old man shouts that this is what happens when weak students like him dare to challenge him. Where the shed once stood, a column of smoke now rises, revealing the wreckage of the once fine building. All the man can think is that he'll need a new place to interrogate people. Calmly, he walks toward the explosion site to search for the boy's body, purely for his own amusement. Taking something from his jacket, he walks on, still laughing, thinking about how irritating that had been. While wiping his face, Iwako freezes, noticing something strange. As the smoke disperses, a silhouette becomes clearer amidst the crater. Stuttering in disbelief, the noble stares at the scene. With slow steps, a figure walks out from the site of the impact. "Didn't I just ask for a little chat?" the protagonist asks, mouth agape. The director wonders aloud how a student could have escaped such an attack without a single scratch. Regaining his composure, he asks the boy his name. Casually, the young man asks back who he is, with a piercing gaze. The young man replies that he already knows him. The director retorts, shouting that he's never seen him before in his life and demanding to know his name. "Iwako, now you're hurting my feelings," the hero says with a laugh. "Have you really forgotten me?" he asks, striking a pose Masato always used to make. With a vacant stare, the man refuses to believe what is happening and immediately backs away from the boy. Still distraught, the noble knows it's impossible for this to be his former colleague. Suddenly, a thought crosses his mind and clarifies everything. The protagonist continues to stare at him in silence. "You only saw what was in the papers, didn't you, brat?" the director says, ordering him to stop his little charade, gritting his teeth. Even after so many years, he finds it difficult to say that name aloud, raising his hand to the sky. Green magic envelops the old man's entire arm, shouting that Misato Kyoshiro has already been defeated. Wind surrounds the director's body as the ground around him trembles. Bored, the warriors sigh in disgust. As he walks forward, he remarks that his colleague was always like that, believing only what was convenient for him. Desperate, the director yells that if he gets any closer, he will strike him down. Smiling, the young man already has a plan in mind. Energy begins to condense in the protagonist's hand as he says that Iwako was swayed by the sweet words of those around him. Menacingly, he asks if that was the real reason he betrayed him. Completely lost in his own emotions, the man unleashes a blast of wind that engulfs the entire clearing. With his own spell ready, the warrior prepares to react. Just as the attack is about to hit him, he strikes the projectile with his bare palm. The massive spell is harmlessly deflected to the side, breaking out in a cold sweat. The old man recognizes that magic. It was the same ability Kiyoshiro used years ago. The deflected spell hits the ground, causing a massive explosion that shakes the entire area. Iwako's spirit shatters, and he collapses to his knees. He cannot accept the truth. His former colleague was standing right there, even after being sealed away. Drawing closer, the protagonist confirms that he was indeed imprisoned. With hatred in his voice, he continues, saying he was thrown into an abyss of despair. Unable to move, Iwako asks if he is truly Masato Koshiro. The young man kneels, saying it took him too long. He smiles, saying it's been a while, but he's glad I remembers. Unable to believe the truth, the man already broken inside wonders if this could even be possible. He leaps to his feet, shouting. The director tells him not to take him for a fool. After all, for that to be possible, he would have had to die and return to this world again. A greenish energy envelops his hand. The light spreads through the area as the old man says that ghosts should shut their mouths. As he points his arm, several blasts of sharp wind fly toward our warrior. However, without a worry, he simply leaps back and all the attacks miss as he retreats. While dodging, the young man notices something coming at him from above. Another enormous fist made of earth tries to crush him, but he dodges it with a smile. Stunned, the man stares at the boy's immense dexterity. Even knowing he's at a disadvantage, he tries to come up with a plan. During his time with the Golden Seekers, he had never been a combatant and was always ridiculed for it. Trying to prove to himself that he isn't weak, energy flows from his entire body. It disperses as the director takes control of the terrain around him. Using all his energy, he prepares a technique that took 20 years to create, a unique one that combined wind and earth. All the emotions exploding inside him were concentrated into that powerful spell, a never-before-seen attack. Combining two elements is fired at our hero. The surrounding trees shake from the force of the blow. A thunderous sound echoes as they crash to the ground. Upon impact, an immense explosion erupts, sending rock fragments flying in all directions. What do you think of my most powerful magic? The old man asks, breathless. He stares intently into the massive cloud of dust. Silence falls over the once noisy area. Relieved, the man begins to laugh. Celebrating, he shouts that he finally did something no one had ever done before. He had single-handedly defeated the arrogant Masato Kiyoshiro. Still shouting, the nobleman boasts about how much he has improved over the years. 20 long years had passed since they last saw each other. Back then, Iwako didn't have a prominent role within the famous group, happier than he had ever been in his life. He yells that he shouldn't have been underestimated. With each passing year, the saint's level had grown higher. Finally, he pauses to catch his breath. All the man can think is that after what he's done, no one can say a thing. He will be the true strongest among the holy pentagrams. A voice asking if he was finished makes the old man freeze instantly. Brushing the dust from his clothes, our protagonist was simply waiting for him to finish his speech. Trembling and unable to stand, Iwako asks how he managed to dodge all of that. The man asks if he was capable of casting any powerful magic. And in a mocking tone, our boy replies that of course he can, since he's the hero of the era. Approaching his opponent, the warrior finally lets his magic flow. With a slight smile, the young man says he can finally unleash his anger without holding back. Losing his strength, all the director can think is that this boy wasn't human. However, after all the trouble he went through, he refuses to back down now. He prepares himself, raising his arm and focusing his enchantment. A gigantic palm of earth appears beside our young man, who remains motionless. Once again, the old man smiles, certain he has caught his opponent. Yawning, our protagonist sighs lazily. As he protects himself with a water barrier, he remarks that his colleague is as noisy as ever. Upon contact with the barrier, Iwako's enchantment is dispersed. Angry, he asks if the warrior really thinks that can defeat him. All his composure vanishes when he hears the comment, shouting for him to stay back. He conjures blades of wind that shoot forward at high speed. Our hero makes a single slight movement with his arm. The attacks miss him as a hurricane forms around the warrior, covering his face. The director tries to shield himself from the immense force of the counterattack. Even by focusing all his strength, he isn't strong enough to withstand it. Iwako is thrown back by the wind, slamming hard against a tree. When he opens his eyes, all he can see is Masato in front of him, his hands ablaze. The only option left for the poor man is to bow and beg his colleague for mercy and forgiveness. Bowing as low as he can, he does his best to apologize. The young man watches the scene with a completely empty gaze. The nobleman's true intention was to take advantage of his old friend's kindness to launch a surprise attack. Cutting the old man off, our protagonist tells him to shut up. A menacing aura envelops him as he says this was the same way they sealed him in the past. And that trick won't work a second time. This time, the man genuinely pleads for his life, begging Masato is to remember they were once friends as the flame in his hand flares even brighter. The warrior says, Iwako has no right to say such a thing, not after turning him into a demon of vengeance. A powerful blow strikes the traitor. A barrage of attacks follows. each hit infused with a different element. The director stumbles backward, completely drained of strength, with his vision blurring. All he can see is the silhouette of the man who was once his friend. As his hope vanishes, he thinks to himself that he should have never provoked this monster. A devastating blow strikes him, sending him flying and obliterating everything in his path. The resulting explosion incinerates everything in the vicinity. With the last of his strength, the man asks if he can ask just one question. But Masato scoffs, saying that even if he did, he wouldn't be conscious to hear the answer. After a long fight, Iwako regains consciousness. Standing over the man, Masato exclaims, "You're finally awake!" The old man screams and scrambles away in desperation, dragging himself across the ground. He pleads with the young man not to kill him. "Oh, please, I'm not going to kill you," the protagonist says nonchalantly. The boy closes in as the panicked old man finds himself cornered against a tree. In a menacing tone, Masato asks if he's ready to answer some questions. He then pulls a phone from his pocket and shows it to him. He orders Iwako to tell him everything he knows about a woman in his contacts named Lei Ruakshi. The man shouts indignantly that it's his phone, trying to snatch it from his opponent's hand, sidestepping the attempt. The protagonist says that according to the old man's call history, this layperson contacted him earlier today. With a terrifying glare, he asks the defeated man what they talked about. Tense and apprehensive, the old man says the woman is coming to Japan in 3 days and just wanted to have a casual chat. The protagonist laughs, satisfied, thinking that in 3 days, his next target will be in the country. Lowering the phone, he says he's already decided on his next move. "I'm giving this back to you, and from now on, act normally around Lei," the young man orders, tossing the phone to the man on the ground. Our hero warns Iwako not to reveal his identity as someone who has been reincarnated. He points to the other man's heart, explaining that he implanted a certain spell on him while he was unconscious. Activating a spell. The protagonist warns that if the old man tells Lei who he really is, there will be consequences. He crushes a small sphere of fire in his hand, and the resulting flare-up instills deep fear, leaving Iwako in shock. "Be sure to keep your promise," Kyoichiro says before walking away, laughing to himself. The protagonist thinks that he doesn't actually use that kind of fire magic. Seeing the old man so distraught, the boy reflects that the bluff must have worked perfectly, especially given his personality. Iwako collapses in anguish, and the young man thinks to himself that he won't use hypnosis. He wants him desperate, but fully conscious. 3 days passed and Laruaki was now on a plane. She sat in her seat on a flight bound for Japan. Her assistant, Yang, told her they were almost at their destination. In the background, a flight attendant could be heard announcing over the microphone that the plane would be landing soon. Before the flight attendant could finish her announcement, she screamed, startling Lei and her assistant. Suddenly, a masked man emerged with the flight attendant as a hostage, while another shouted that they were hijacking the aircraft. They pointed their weapons at the passengers and ordered everyone to get on the floor. Lei stood up and calmly walked toward the men. The criminal kept yelling for her to obey or he would shoot. In a split second, the woman dashed forward, launching a direct attack. She knocked the man to the ground with a single blow, giving the hijackers barely any time to react. In a series of swift movements, she struck the bandits squarely. The crew stared in astonishment at the fallen enemies. They exclaimed that it was Lile Ruxi of the Pentagram Saints in the flesh and celebrated their rescue. With the plane now landed, the police led the bandits away while the Saint and Yang watched from a distance. An older gentleman approached them and thanked the woman for her help. She replied that she was glad to have been on this flight and thanked him, saying they had prevented the airline's reputation from being tarnished. Her assistant examined a weapon he had taken from one of the criminals, and Lile added that it was a type that doesn't show up on detectors. Recently, there have been some armed groups with equipment made from materials obtained from dungeons, the woman stated. The man said he should give his team some weapons for self-defense. "Like the weapon you're carrying," she said, approaching and placing a hand on the man's shoulder. He bowed nervously, but with agility, exclaiming that he would do just that. Now, at the airport, Lei was on a call, telling someone to release the hijackers. Yang Shinyu brought up the topic, mentioning that everything had gone very well, while Ruaki smiled confidently and claimed it had even been fun. "Planting the criminals, and in the end, helping to close the deal after all," she said, reminiscing as she continued on her way. They stopped in front of a crowd of fans, and she concluded that it had all been very good for publicity, too. The crowd shouted Lei's name, celebrating her deed on the plane, and she waved to them as she left the area. The CEO arrived at the academy in an escorted limousine. Stepping out of the car, the clan leader said to herself that it was time to take care of the business she had come to Japan for. In the principal's office, Iwako stared out the window with a grumpy expression, a few bandages on his face. He was startled by a knock on the door, followed by Lei entering the room with a smile, apologizing for the intrusion. With both of them seated, she asked about the progress in finding the student with the void attribute he had mentioned. Hesitating, Iwako replied that it had been a false alarm and that Roxy was right about the student being useless. "Even though it's a unique attribute, it doesn't seem to be anything special after all," the woman said, sipping her tea. The principal thought apprehensively that he had to act normally because if he let any information slip, the magic placed on him would activate. The woman placed her cup on the table and continued saying she wanted to discuss the real reason she was there, her expression turning serious. She went on stating that she wanted to talk about the new drug they were making and the choice for the next test subject. Laughing, Lillet remarked that it was a brilliant idea to use the academy system for the tests as she crossed her legs. Meanwhile, the protagonist was listening to their conversation through an earpiece as they began to discuss a list of students of interest. From a distance, the boy expressed his disgust at how despicable those people were, with pure hatred and revulsion. He said that the only one who would experience such despair would be Lele Ruwaki herself. On the television, a reporter was announcing the day's top story. Lele Ruwaki, the pentagram saint, had arrived in Japan yesterday. Standing in front of the TV, the young man listened as the reporter said she was being highly praised for saving the plane. The protagonist reflected on the woman in the news and the betrayal from 20 years ago. He thought about the saint's current activities, how she had gotten rich by producing weapons with materials from dungeons. Analyzing the conversation he had overheard between her and Iwako, he concluded that they were using the school for nefarious purposes. As he put on his uniform, the young man reflected on how the heroine seemed so good on the outside, but behind the curtains, she was just taking advantage of people. Now even more determined, he thought that he couldn't just ignore the situation and headed out. At the academy, the young man walks through the halls, scrolling on his phone and pondering his next move. As he reads the news, he remembers how tough security was to deal with when he first arrived. His thoughts are interrupted by his classmate, Asahi Karen. She greets him cheerfully with a good morning, and he, recognizing her immediately, returns the greeting. Beside him, Karen comments that he's reading the article about Saint, Lei, but he retorts, saying he was just browsing. Asahi continues the conversation, saying that woman is incredible for having fought against the criminals. The girl also mentions that the Great Serpent of Changshan is very popular, which piques the protagonist's curiosity. Karen explains that this was the clan the CEO created, and that the group has very powerful members. Recalling Ruki's companions, he thinks that those guards might have been members of the clan. The girl says that many students plan to pursue a military career and asks about him, and he immediately denies having such an ambition. However, before he can finish his sentence, he realizes he can use the Changshan clan to get closer to the boss. Walking ahead, he thanks Asahi for helping him decide what to do, leaving her confused as she watches him walk away down the hall. Back in the director's office, the phone rings, startling the man in his chair. Upon answering, he hears Kiyohiro on the other end of the line, saying he needs a favor. The director anxiously asks what it is, and the boy gives him instructions on what to do when Lei gets in touch. In a laboratory, a man is tied up and kneeling on the floor, surrounded by doctors jotting everything down on their clipboards. As the team observes him, he groans in anguish, breathing heavily. The doors slide open, revealing a familiar silhouette. Lei, followed by her assistant, Yang, walks in laughing and asks how the bound man is feeling. He begins to beg them to stop giving him those drugs, asking if he's going to die if this continues. Immediately, he is struck in the face by the woman's foot and falls injured. With her heel still pressed against the man's face, she says there's no way she would listen to the opinion of a lab rat. Smiling, she tells him he doesn't need to be so pessimistic. The test subject looks at her terrified, and Roxy continues saying he'll become stronger if he's compatible with the drug. Stepping away, Lei orders them to continue and the doctors comply. They approach the man who is still pleading and prepare to inject more of the substance. Before he can say anything else, they restrain him and administer the injection. Groaning in pain, the man tries to say something but only coughs violently. One of the doctors holds him down on the floor while their leader watches from a distance. The victim, lying on the ground with his eyes rolled back and drooling, babbles in a weak attempt to speak. Lillet calmly comments that the side effect this time was the loss of speech, and that the item doesn't work without magical abilities. She turns and says she needs more data. Leaving the facility, Yang, right behind her, comments that they'll need more people for the tests soon, and Roxy agrees. Casually scrolling on her phone, the woman says that as usual, they'll have to recruit people for the clan. Stepping into the elevator, the leader calls Iwako and starts talking about the test she had told him about. Lilei says she'll need those who are skilled with magic and asks him to get some for the tests. He listens to her seriously and says he has a proposal to hold a selection at the academy to find the best candidates. Laughing, she scoffs into her phone, admitting the old man has good ideas sometimes. Upon reaching the ground floor, she says the dates, times, and specifications will be sent shortly. On the other end, the director hastily hangs up, thinking he had done exactly as Kiyohiro ordered. At an assembly with the academy's students, Ruok's assistant makes an announcement. He informs them that the Great Serpent of Changshan has decided to hold a selection exam to find new recruits. The surprised students can hardly believe the incredible opportunity to join the famous Serpent clan. Kichiro smiles, satisfied, thinking this is the perfect opportunity to get closer to Lei. In a stadium, the students gather information as a man standing before them all thanks them for coming to the selection. He explains how the exam will work and begins to give the instructions. In the background, Asai thinks that before he can join the Great Serpent Clan and get closer to Lei, he first needs to pass this selection. When I approached Iwako, I tried not to draw attention, but that can't be the case now. The young man reflects, wondering how to capture the attention of Shinulei's right-hand man and the other examiners. He watches the man who is still speaking. He concludes that he must display his full power, and his gaze becomes confident. As he rests against a wall, someone calls out to him. Karen approaches and asks if he's there for the clan's admission exam. He nods and asks if she is too. The boy thinks to himself that he doesn't want her involved in his plans. Karen, still shy, says she knows she doesn't belong in a place like this. Curious, he listens as she explains that despite that, she has her own reasons. Brightening up, she tells him they should both do their best to pass the test together, and the young man agrees. Now even more resolute, he feels he cannot miss this chance. A man announces the start of the magical power measurement tests. Pointing to a round device, he explains that the object will measure the magical power of anyone who touches it. With the students lined up, the men in suits instruct them to touch the object one by one. A boy walks up confidently and shouts as he places his hand on the stone. When he finishes, the examiner sighs and takes notes. Another proctor calls out a size name and he walks toward the testing area. He greets the man, shows his identification, and says he'll be in his care. The evaluator just nods. The man notices the student is level 30 and possesses the void attribute, thinking to himself that he doesn't have high expectations for this test. Exuding confidence, Kyoto touches the object in front of him. The measurement device explodes in a profusion of colorful lights and waves of mana. Startled, the examiner quickly shields his eyes from the bright light emanating from the meter. The surrounding students are stunned by the intensity of the lights and the wind generated by the test. When the young man pulls his hand away from the object, the brightness subsides. Calmly, the boy asks the man if that was enough, and he quickly replies that it was. Asai walks away nonchalantly as the examiner notes that this student is without a doubt an S rank. In the skills test, the young man, shrouded in a thin layer of mana, projects an earth manipulation spell. The evaluator wonders if Asai can only generate a ball of mud, thinking that just having a lot of magical power isn't enough. As if reading his thoughts, the boy smiles defiantly. He then activates a second spell, generating a sphere of water. The mastery he displays leaves the observer perplexed. Before the man can say anything, the protagonist begins to cast a sequence of fire, lightning, and other elemental spells. With ease, he forms several spheres of different elements at the same time which orbit around him. One of the observers exclaims in shock that he activated all the basic elements simultaneously. What do you think now? Seeing a void attribute once called useless? Doing things like this, he wonders victoriously. At the end of the test, Karen approaches him celebrating and says that was incredible. He thanks her and tells his friend to do her best as well as she looks at him with determination. Now, in front of a planter, it is Karen's turn to be evaluated. In a swift motion, she activates a gleaming golden magic. The small plants in the pot are enveloped by the magic and quickly begin to revive. The flowers start to grow and bloom more and more, the magic shining around them. When the light ceases, the girl now has giant, beautiful flowers at her feet. Some troublemakers watching comment if reviving a few flowers is all she can do. While the protagonist looks at her surprised, he wonders if that could be the light attribute and reflects on how rare that power is. Karen walks away dejected. The boy thinks it must be difficult for the examiners to evaluate that type of power and feels sorry for his classmate. At the same time, he is relieved that she won't be dragged into his plans as young Shinyu watches her from a distance. The assistant notes on his phone that Karen is worth using in the medication trials. The evaluators standing before the lined-up students announce that the final test will be a duel. Assistant Yang points to a group of warriors, explaining that they will be the opponents. One of the students from amidst the frightened crowd asks if the man wants them to fight members of the Serpent Clan. Reassuring the students, he states that they don't need to worry as the warriors will only be evaluating them, and it doesn't matter if they lose. However, he thinks maliciously that there's no way any ordinary student could defeat one of them. A muscular man stretches, letting out an amused laugh, and asks the boy before him if he's the one who's been turning heads in the tests. He then says it looks like the boy achieved good results, but he's about to show him how useless that is in a real fight. The young man nods and says he hopes to learn a lot from the warrior. Scoffing, the enemy boasts that he'll end this in a single blow. Activating earth magic, he prepares a powerful attack. The duel begins without delay as he hurls large rocks at the boy. Our protagonist takes a defensive stance and using wind magic distorts the path of the stones, stopping them in midair. With a simple flick of his arm, the young man changes the stone's trajectory and sends them flying back at the warrior. The rocks strike the enemy, who holds a defensive position to avoid any decisive blows. The man is stunned, thinking that the student shattered his attack magic with a single move. Leaping back, the clan member looks again, but the protagonist is no longer there, leaving him even more astonished. When the warrior comes to his senses, Kyoiro appears behind him with a blade of pure ice pointed at his throat. He asks if using the launch as a distraction to attack is what the evaluator calls real combat, and adds that he has learned a lot. The judge declares Kuichiro the winner. He dispels the magic and is immediately surrounded by other students and examiners. Among the crowd watching the duel, a bewildered Yang thinks that the boy defeated an official member of the clan. With clear suspicion, he wonders who this student is. That night in her building, Lei lounges lazily in an armchair while hearing over the phone that the exam is over. Bored, she asks if they found any interesting little rats, and the man on the other end of the line replies that one student caught their attention. An interesting brat, she asks. Assistant Yang replies that the young man passed with flying colors, putting on quite a performance. However, the boy has the void attribute. He says, Lei ponders this, recalling that the director had mentioned such a student. The woman laughs cunningly, rising from her armchair. She says it seems she's gotten her hands on an interesting test subject, letting out a wicked laugh, with the students gathered in the hall. Assistant Yang takes the stage and announces he will reveal who passed the selection. He announces Asai Kyosuke as the first-place student who remains still with a serious expression. Some nearby students comment that the exam was ridiculous and that it was obvious he would be approved. Internally, the protagonist thinks that everything went exactly as he had planned and that now he'll be able to get closer to Lei. In second place, Asahi Karen. The man at the microphone exclaims, leaving the girl surprised. The girl confirms with excitement, while a stunned Kuichiro thinks that she was summoned too. Reflecting on this, he concludes that he never imagined that simply having a unique attribute would be enough to pass the test. Recalling something, he realizes that Ruwaki seems to be using the academy to plot some kind of conspiracy. Looking at Asahi, the young man purrs that there must be some other reason behind her selection. The girl looks at him with a vibrant smile, clearly happy about being accepted, and he sighs, smiling back in response, reassuring himself. He thinks that it's all right as he won't let them lay a finger on his friend. With a serious and determined expression, he decides that he just needs to achieve his goal while protecting her. A few days after the selection exam, those who passed are summoned to the Japanese headquarters of the Great Chang'an Serpent Clan gathered together. They listen as Yang Xinyu welcomes them. He explains that on that day, they will conduct a proper checkup before they begin their activities in the clan. Asai's expression darkens when the assistant mentions that Lele Roxy will come to see them. The man guides the youths through the building, saying that the leader will meet them after the checkup and invites them on a tour. Walking through the building, everyone is in awe of the place. Although he wanted to meet that woman immediately, Asai reflects that he can't leave Karine alone. The girl, oblivious to his thoughts, looks around and comments that being in such a large building makes her nervous. And the young man agrees. Turning to him, she admits that despite her nervousness, being able to join the Serpent Clan makes her very happy. Kuichiro changes the subject, asking why she wanted to become a member of Changshan so badly. She explains awkwardly that her mother is hospitalized, and the hospital bills are very high. Understanding the girl's situation better, he thinks that Karen wasn't there for selfish reasons. Returning to the group, he concludes that now he must do his best to protect her. Xinyu points to a staircase and says, "That's the way." The young man thinks that this must be the base. The students arrive in a dark hall filled with computers, with several men in suits surrounding the area. The boy realizes this is a testing laboratory and immediately connects these men to the other events. Assistant Yang gives the order to close the doors. With the click of the door shutting behind them, the youths are startled. Smiling inwardly, the protagonist notes that they clearly have no intention of letting anyone leave. Two anxious students approach Senue asking what's going on. Pure hatred emanates from the man who threateningly tells them to be quiet, frightening the two even more. As explained earlier, "We will conduct a proper examination," he says, taking a vial from a guard's hand. Now, holding up a syringe with a red liquid, he announces they will test the new substance they've created. He explains that the item is made from materials mined in dungeons and has the ability to enhance one's physique and magic. One of the boys is surprised, while the other nervously asks if that isn't supposed to be a good thing. Asai steps forward and asks defiantly what the side effects are. Yang Xinyu laughs sarcastically and, pointing to a television nearby, says it would be faster to show them. A video begins to play. A boy screams in desperation as someone approaches with a syringe in hand. Everyone watches perplexed, unable to believe what is before their eyes. The boy in the video vomits, babbles incomprehensibly, and loses consciousness. They demand an explanation, and Assistant Yang says that what they just saw was the result on an incompatible subject, thus answering the question. "Don't be ridiculous," the boys shout as one of them declares there's no way he'd use that. The two activate their spells, one of fire and the other of water, and take fighting stances. Charging forward in a direct attack, they try to hit Yang, and one of them yells for them to be let out. Kyosuke seriously tells Asahi not to leave his side as she watches the scene, frightened. Rocky's right-hand man activates an earth magic, strengthening his hands, and strikes the two boys squarely. They spit blood and fall to the ground, curling up from the blow. Meanwhile, Xinyu exclaims, disappointed, that the number of samples has now decreased. Suddenly, he points and asks if they should start with Karen, who is terrified. Filling the syringe, he points out that she is the only student with the light attribute and that he expects good results from this test. He walks toward her and readies the syringe to inject the liquid while the girl freezes in fear. With the man getting closer, Asai steps in front of the girl to protect her. She looks at him worried. Yang asks what he's doing, and the young man replies that he's keeping the trash away from her. The man before him is offended, his expression hardening as he's overcome with rage. With a single command, several guards move in to attack the young man. One of the henchmen tries to punch Kyo, but he dodges it easily, striking the guard with a precise blow to the back of the neck. Wreathed in lightning, he makes him scream in pain. The men in suits around them are caught by surprise, wondering what they just saw. Before they can counterattack, the protagonist moves quickly, closing the distance between them. With powerful attacks, he knocks out the guards in the blink of an eye. He quickly takes down the last one, who falls to his knees on the ground. Yang, stunned, thinks it's impossible that all those people were defeated in a single attack. The boy turns fierce and tells the man he's next. Faltering, Xinu is startled and takes a step back as Asai approaches. Since things have come to this, he thinks anxiously, lunging forward. He quickly reaches out, deciding to capture Asahi, who flinches and screams, expressionless. Kyosuke grabs him and says he thought he'd warned him not to touch the girl, breaking free from the grip in desperation. Yang leaps away. Distressed, he wonders what's wrong with that boy since an ordinary student wouldn't be able to do all that. Threateningly, with his eyes glowing like a beast, the boy tells him to prepare himself. Young Shinu is increasingly cornered. Before him, Asai protects Asahi and prepares to fight. With no more escape routes, the man curses in desperation. Kyosuke tells the girl to stay behind him, and she thanks him in a low voice. In the background, the girl thinks about how incredible her friend is. Recalling the battle from moments ago, she reflects that she couldn't even see her classmates' movements. She knew he had gotten stronger, but she never imagined it would be like this. Facing the students, the assistant grumbles, telling the boy not to be so arrogant. Asai replies that he wants to ask him something. He points out that the academy students are being used as guinea pigs, and in a serious tone asks why. Yang laughs in scorn and sighs. He replies that it's quite simple. Those who follow Ruwaki can receive her blessings. Gesturing, he continues, explaining that once the drug is complete, she will become even stronger. The boy retorts, questioning if he really thinks inhumane experiments are an acceptable means to an end. Slightly, Shinyu replies that they just use what's available and that's all there is to it. Smiling, he admits that in fact it's an honor for the youths to serve as test rats, which shocks Asai. Hearing this, the boy remembered Asahi telling him she wanted to join the clan to help her hospitalized mother. He recalled her excitement as she said that joining the Changshan Great Serpent clan made her happy. All of this filled the protagonist with a deep hatred, causing him to clench his fists and grit his teeth. Not satisfied, Yang taunted him, saying the girl behind him should be incredibly grateful they had chosen her as a test subject. Filled with resentment and disgust, the young man ordered him to shut up in a deep, threatening voice. In a violent explosion of mana, the boy was enveloped by a thick layer of blue light that blinded the man. The aggressor stared at the young man, surprised. Asai's face contorted with rage as he asked Ginyu who he thought he was, declaring they were nothing but scum who understood nothing. The girl was moved by the empathy in his words. Feeling the pressure, Yang wondered about the heavy presence he felt, questioning if this was really just a student, trying to regain control. The assistant smiled. He began to say that normally he would put the boy in his place, but he didn't dislike his courage. Adopting a business-like demeanor, the man asked if he wanted to serve Lady Ruwaki, framing the proposal as a unique opportunity. He said that if Asai handed over the girl, the lady might even make him an executive and would surely be pleased, telling him to shut up again. The protagonist said he couldn't forgive such despicable people. Yang warned him, saying the boy would regret this choice. Activating a powerful earth magic, the assistant enveloped himself in a sheet of golden mana. With his eyes glowing, he took a combat stance and shattered the ground around him with the force of his energy. The young man noted that the man was using body-strengthening magic. In an attack stance, Xinyu agreed, saying that combining it with his martial skills made him invincible. He then challenged the young man to a fight. With a thunderous leap, the assistant shattered the ground where he stood. In an instant, he appeared above the boy and prepared to deliver a precise punch. Asai dodged with a leap to the side, and the man's blow destroyed the spot where he had been. The ground began to crack, the fissurers spreading close to where Asahi stood, and she was startled by such immense attack power. Mockingly, Yang said it seemed the boy had actually managed to dodge that. The protagonist thought that the strengthening magic was truly powerful and began to devise a plan. When least expected, Ginyu charged to attack again, shouting for Asai not to run this time. Concentrating, Asai began to focus his imagination to activate his magic. Seeing the boy standing still before his offensive, the assistant shouted, asking what he was doing and if he had already given up. As he attacked, the man finally yelled for the boy to die. Before the blow could hit him, Asai opened his eyes and activated the void magic. In a fluid motion, he caught the enemy's fist. Stunned, Yang spoke weakly, saying that it couldn't be possible. Looking at the young man holding him, he recognized something. He wondered if it was the same magic as his, but soon realized the young man's was even stronger. Ironically, Asai said he could also use body-strengthening magic now, and thanked him. He continued saying it was all thanks to the man, since he was able to imagine how to use the attribute after seeing it in action and prepared to attack. With a single powerful blow, he struck Senu, who was too surprised to defend himself, sending him flying. The assistant was hit squarely, the breath knocked out of him. His body was thrown against a wall, shattering it on impact. As he hit the concrete, all he could think was how impossible the situation seemed. Lying on the ground, he wondered who this boy could possibly be. With disgust in his eyes, Asai watched him fall. Turning to Asahi, he asked if she was okay, and she quickly thanked him. Heading towards the door, he said he would open it and that they should get out of there. As the injured boys began to get up, his classmates asked where he was going, but received no answer. With a single blow, Asai destroyed the large doors. Leaving the area, the young man left his classmates behind. He said he had something he needed to do and went on alone. Elsewhere, Roxy was surprised by a call from a subordinate reporting an emergency. The person reported that Assistant Yang had been defeated and the test subjects from the academy had escaped. Lei grew irritated, demanding more of an explanation. As the guard continued saying that someone strong was attacking, he was abruptly cut off and the woman was shocked. Worried, she wondered what could have happened. Suddenly, someone greeted her. Asai appeared at the door of the saint's office. She asked who he was and why he was there. The young man replied that it was for a very simple reason. With a threatening aura, he declared that he had come to settle the score for what happened 20 years ago. Lee, curious, asked what debt from 20 years ago the young man was referring to exactly. Asai approached, saying the CEO seemed confused and asked if he needed to spell it out for her. The boy stated that ever since the SSS-ranked dungeon from 20 years ago, the saints of the pentagram have been glorified. The woman glared at him, her expression a mix of irritation and impatience. Then he commented that a certain conspiracy had been carried out on that day. Ruaki asks scornfully what a student is babbling about and if he's trying to give her a history lesson. Asai says the so-called saints now control the world's major sectors, and she replies that they were chosen for subjugating evil. Glancing sideways, the clan leader asks what he's getting at, but she is interrupted. Grimly, the protagonist claims that the story of them being chosen for subjugating evil is far from the truth. On edge, she asks what he just said, thinking that his aura has changed drastically. Reliving the memories of that day, Kuchiro accuses her of using her comrades as a sacrifice, thinking of the traitors receiving applause. The young man says they did it to build a legacy and reap the rewards. Remembering Asahi's smiling face, he concludes saying that even now she tramples on the others who stood by her side. Defiantly, the student asks if he's wrong. The woman lets out a short laugh, with disdain. She says she was wondering what the boy was insinuating and asks if he believes in conspiracy theories. Kyosuke replies dryly that it's not just a conspiracy and that he knows of her deeds as a CEO and a saint. In an accusatory tone, he coldly declares that the saint pushed a comrade into the portal. Roxy freezes, completely stunned by what she heard. Looking wearily at the boy, the woman wonders how an unknown student could know that. Facing Lee, who is getting closer and closer to the wall, Asai asks if she still hasn't figured out who he is. With confidence and seriousness, Masato reveals his identity. The woman is shocked to hear her former colleague's name. Angry and growing desperate, Ruaki shouts that it's impossible while Kyoiro retorts. The man admits he used all the power of the level 100 time attribute to return. Showing her shock, she hears him recall that back then, she had called him a monster precisely because of that power. In disbelief, she says this can't be true and asks if it's really Masato standing there, replying coldly. The boy declares that he also knows what her company has been doing in secret. Taunting her, he says that if he brings it to light, her reputation will be ruined. She screams at him not to mess with her. Walking toward her, the young man challenges her, saying those should be his words. Emanating magic. Asai recalls the reasons what happened 20 years ago and the fact that she trampled on his friend's dreams, moving closer with a look overflowing with hatred. He says he will never forgive her for these things. Feeling increasingly pressured, Lei smiles and sigh, belittling him. She warns him not to underestimate her as he's no longer in Masato's old body. The woman grabs the spear attached to the wall behind her and says that the man has now dared to show himself, shouting that she'll make him regret it. Ruoxi raises the weapon and prepares an attack with lightning surrounding her. In one swift move, she kneels and unleashes an electric slash that shatters everything it touches. The magic is so strong it destroys the room, causing several deep cracks. Asai quickly retreats and is not hit. Taking a fighting stance, Lei laughs and asks what the boy thinks of the spear her company developed, smiling confidently. The CEO says they forged it with materials from dungeons, stronger than any metal. With a leap, The woman closes the distance between them and says she'll show him just how sharp the weapon is. The saint attacks repeatedly while Kioski dodges her thrusts. For a second, the young man just watches the weapon's movements. Smugly, she smiles and says that dodging is his only good skill. However, the warrior grows nervous, thinking that something feels wrong. Watching the young man dodge the blow, Ruaki wonders why her attacks aren't hitting him. The boy, expressionless, says in a low voice that he understands the situation. He states that Lei has been too busy playing CEO and seems slower now. Scornfully, he comments that she's not even better than Ikeo. Veins of irritation pop on the woman's face. Stunned by the absurdity, shouting for him to stop talking nonsense, the traitor prepares to launch another attack with thunder magic. She throws her spear and the lightning with force at the boy, hitting him in the heart. Realizing her success, she thinks she finally managed to hit him. However, someone in the background laments, saying that it's a pity. As Ruxi approaches the spear, the body dissolves into mana and is sucked into something behind her. She's perplexed to see the protagonist standing there with mana burning like flames around him, wondering if this was his attribute at work. The woman concludes she's never heard of anyone who could use it like that. She takes the spear in her hands again and considers her options. With the weapon now wreathed in fire, the saint gets into a fighting stance, spinning it as she prepares. Lei thinks she'll end this with the next attack. Confident and increasingly irritated, she shouts that she'll make sure to shut his damn mouth. The force of the blow produces a flaming attack that cuts through the air. She gains ground and approaches Masato, ready for the final blow. A gale is produced by the mana, and the magic dissipates as the warrior thrusts her spear. Suddenly, Ruaki sees the young man catch the blade with just his fingers. In disbelief, she is stunned, muttering that it's unreal. Looking down on her, Asai concludes that this seems to be the best Lei can do, using all her power. Terrified and cornered, she hears him say that 20 years ago, her skills were even better. The woman quickly snaps back to her senses, deciding to use her last resort and advancing again. Without a second thought, she drops the spear and rushes right past the boy, who asks what she intends to do. The protagonist suddenly realizes his opponent's intention. From a nearby table, Ruoxi grabs a syringe filled with a familiar red substance and aims it at her own neck. The injection causes a blast of mana that blinds the protagonist as the woman applies the item to herself, partially shielding himself. The young man looks impatiently at the person before him and says, "This is going too far." A dark miasma surrounds her as she convulses. Her black hair turns white and her arms darken. With gray, scaly skin and feral eyes, she questions who the monster is now. Certain of her victory, Ruoxi laughs, saying no one can defeat her now. The protagonist seriously asks if she thinks it will be easier to win using an unfinished item. The woman sighs, telling him to stop underestimating her, and asks if he has any idea how much was spent producing that. She explains that she mined materials that can only be found in the deepest dungeons and spent years refining them. Reminiscing, she admits that ever since witnessing his inhuman fight 20 years ago, she has been trying to achieve that power. With a wide smile, she adds that she has finally found something that surpasses even Masato, and thanks him for it. Disgusted, all he declares is that it's pathetic. Her expression falters, and she glances at him, doubting what she just heard. Asai continues, asking if she really just claimed it surpasses him, and if she's bragging about relying on a drug. Filled with hatred, she asks what he dared to say. The young man scoffs and apologizes for interrupting her little explanatory monologue. Taking a step forward, positioning himself to fight, Kyo, shrouded in a flaming aura and fire magic, declares, "It's time to end this." As she also gets into a fighting stance, Roxy says they should settle this in a single attack to see who is stronger. With a loud bang, his opponent moves to attack. She closes in, yelling for him to prepare as she lunges with a powerful strike. The boy dodges with ease and she smashes into a wall, destroying it, as debris falls around him, and his opponent is shrouded in a dark miasma. They size each other up. Rui turns to the boy and asks for his opinion on the attack, declaring it the fruit of her research, surprising him. The woman attacks again in the blink of an eye. A fatal blow lands squarely on him. The force of the strike sends the young man flying, kicking up a cloud of dust as the surroundings shatter. The warrior smiles, thinking she has already won. However, she feels an excruciating pain. Looking down, she notices a long ice spike piercing her feet. As she crouches in pain, the spike suddenly vanishes, and the familiar voice says from a distance that he planted it when she began her attack. Recognizing those words, Ruaki asks, stunned, how he escaped alive, emanating reinforcement mana. Isai says she should thank her own henchman for showing it to him. Lying on the ground, desperate, she hears him say that the drug is impressive, but it only serves to stir the wind. Angered by the statement, the woman asks furiously how he dares to mock her research. "Don't give me that crap," he says. Furious, the young man says threateningly that Ruaki tramples on people and has the audacity to call it progress, frightening her. Koichiro declares in a low tone that it deeply disgusts him. The CEO moves her hand, filling it with more of the miasma, screaming with indignation for him to shut up. She attacks him, aiming for his neck. However, the attacker's hand is stopped by Asai mid-motion. In a fluid and unexpected counterattack, the boy hits her in the stomach with a powerful punch. The concentrated attack knocks the wind out of her. Ruxy wonders if her power isn't working. She collapses as the young man begins to leave the scene. Reflecting before completely losing consciousness, the woman thinks that this is Koichiro's strength. Now, walking past the rubble on his way out, he says to himself that it was never real power to begin with. Now, outside the building, thick smoke pours from one of the floors. Someone calls out to Kioski, getting his attention. He greets Asahi and says she's all right. The girl nods and comments that her friend seems fine, too. The cloud rising from the building draws attention, and reporters comment that the tip about Lei's headquarters being attacked was true. The young people listen, and Karen questions if this is Asai's doing, while their companion playfully brushes it off. Watching the journalist covering the scene, the protagonist thought that the truth about Lei's crimes would be exposed and the test subjects saved. As he was reflecting on how everything that woman had built was now lost, his friend surprised him, interrupting his thoughts to call out to him. The colleague admitted she didn't really know what was going on, but said that without his help, she wouldn't be safe right now. Then, standing face to face, the girl continued shyly. To his shock, she thanked him, relaxing instantly. Kioski thought that he had almost forgotten. Looking at Asahi with a smile, he completed his thought, remembering that helping others used to be his reason for living. That night, the scene shifts to the boy's apartment. The journalist on TV was reporting on the discovery of illegal experiments conducted on humans in Ruaki's secret laboratory. The revelation came after the Saints building was attacked by an unknown Aslant. The reporter said as images of the explosion were shown. Asai began to take off his uniform while listening to the report that Lei was showing signs of memory disturbance, and that the attacker was still at large, wondering how the other members of the pentagram would react. He heard the woman on TV say they had just received breaking news. She announced that the pentagram member, Saint Nathaniel, was issuing a public statement, recognizing that damned name. The protagonist looked at the person in the video like a demon staring at its prey. The blonde man declared that he stood with his companions and had come to deliver an urgent message. He stated that they could only say they were devastated by the incident involving Lei, as the boy watched him with pulsating hatred. Continuing, the saint declared that as her companions, they were ashamed for not having seen and prevented her actions. Asai thought with disgust and bitter irony that the group was going to pretend they knew nothing all over again. Clenching the remote in his hand, the young man figured they were going to do the same thing they did 20 years ago. Remembering those traitors, the young man reflected that the group hadn't changed at all, and that they lie without batting an eye, all to protect their status as heroes of the people. Kyo concluded disgusted and frustrated. He thought that to the group. People like Asahi weren't even sacrifices, but just pebbles on their path. As he watched Cavell speak, the young man pondered. He thought that based on how the man had acted before, there was a high probability he had been the leader of the conspiracy against Masato. He recalled that his former companion had always been calculating and cautious, and that no one knew his whereabouts. Picking up his phone, the young man began to form a plan. Koichiro started scrolling through his phone as he continued to watch the news. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to a church where a woman is kneeling in prayer. In the background, a child addresses her. "That's what they said, Lady Claudia," she replied. "So that's it. I understand now." The saint began to pray for God to guide them to a future full of light. Elsewhere, someone called out to Ingolf, who was sitting in a gym, telling him the council meeting was about to start. Putting down the weight he was holding, the man confirmed he'd be there soon. As the other person apologized for interrupting him, gritting his teeth, the muscular man cursed Lei and grumbled, wondering what on earth that woman had been thinking. Now, the scene changes to Nathaniel in a room with a huge screen where the other saints of the pentagram were on a video call. He called for his companion's attention. Officially opening the meeting, he announced that the council would now begin, and his companions agreed. Walking around the room with his laptop, Nathaniel commented that this concluded the matter. Claudia, her hands still clasped in prayer, confirmed, finding her former colleague deplorable for having her illegal experiments exposed by the Aslant. Her companion, Ingolf, demanded to know what that woman had been doing all this time to bring such shame upon the group's honor. Cavell sat back in his armchair and agreed with the sentiment. Strategically, the man said that despite this, the experiments were conducted solely by Ruaki on her own initiative. He continued declaring that the members of the group knew absolutely nothing. Listening to him, Hideki thought that this was typical of his ever-rational companion. Basically, they were going to abandon her. Although he wasn't sure about Claudia or Ingolf, he was convinced that Nathaniel knew about Lei's crimes. Nervously, the old man thought that abandoning her so easily was a frightening prospect. Picking up a letter beside the notebook, Director Hideki thinks that he must follow that man's instructions. When one of his companions comments that she's curious about the aggressor, Iari steps forward, saying he knows something about it. He shows them the letter in his hand, explaining that the item arrived sealed at the academy and was sent by the same person who exposed Ruaki. The Saint is surprised, and Cavall tells him to read the message's contents to them. The old man nods and, opening the letter, begins to read. I have returned to this present moment from within the portal, and I will deal with each and every one of you. I will meet you all. Hideki continues to read, his voice nervous. Upon reading the name Misato Kyo at the end of the letter, he shocks his companions who were listening intently. With evident concern, Claudia asks if it couldn't just be someone using that name, but Nathaniel denies it. He explains that no one knew about the portal, and that the sender is without a doubt their former companion. The woman suggests he might have used the time attribute, but Ingolf retorts that there's nothing to worry about. Annoyed, St. Vitz replies that if Misato is truly back, all they need to do is defeat him again. Cavall agrees, saying there's no need to act now. Disdainfully, the blonde man continues, suggesting they wait and see what Kiora will do. Later, in Engel's office, the man rises from his chair. Walking to the large window, he repeats his former partner's name, his tone reflective. Clenching his teeth in hatred, he declares that Misato is the one person he will never be able to forgive. Meanwhile, in Kiosk's apartment, the director says over the phone that he did as instructed, and the young man nods, leaning back in a relaxed manner. He thinks that Nathaniel, out of caution, doesn't plan to act directly. The boy reflects that this is good, because once they finally understand he's back, they won't stand still for long. He decides he'll first attack those whose locations are already known, and informs Hideki that they will make their move. Picking up a paper from the table, he hears the old man ask what the plan is. The young man teases, saying it won't be difficult. Kuchiro then tells him to make preparations to transfer him to Engulf's academy. Surprised, Hideki asks if that will be the next target. Asai confirms, saying it will be easy with the short-term exchange program. The old man warns that Golf isn't like him or Lei. There are no bad rumors or shady dealings to be found. Calmly, the protagonist replies that he needs to see the man's face regardless. Ending the call, the young man says he'll leave the formalities to the director. Kyosuke walks out to the balcony and says to himself that there may be no rumors about that man now. But still, his former partner betrayed him 20 years ago. The next day, a plane soars across the sky. Inside a classroom, Asahi watches the aircraft's movement. The girl smiles, satisfied, her cheeks blushing. A plane lands at the airport. Someone walks out with confident strides. We then see our protagonist, who has just arrived in Germany. Impressed by the view, taking out his phone. He recalls that he has already verified the connection between the academy in this country and in Gulf. Putting his plan into action, he thinks that he will use the German academy to get closer to the man. The young man concludes that he must first go to the school and starts walking through the streets. Suddenly, Asai hears a female voice complaining about someone bothering her. Trying to get a better look, he analyzes the scene. She is standing still arguing with two drunk men in front of her. The boy notices that the girl also seems to be Japanese. People speak a different language here. He reflects as if by magic. He uses his void attribute to automatically translate what they are saying. Kyosuke focuses and begins to listen to the conversation. One of the men invites her to spend some time with them, and the other adds, promising they'll make it worth her while. The girl retorts that this is exactly why she called him persistent and refuses to go out with little thugs. The harassers take offense. One of them reaches out to touch her, saying he's going to punish her for her foul mouth. The girl glares menacingly at the hand holding her. Before anyone can do anything, the protagonist intervenes and, cursing at them, tells them to leave her alone. The man on the left, curious, asks who he is to interfere. Repeating the order to leave her alone, Kyoichiro curses at them again. Annoyed, both men turn to face the student. They activate their fire and earth attributes respectively. In a dual attack, they charge at the boy, shouting for him not to underestimate them. The first man lunges forward, preparing a punch. With a gust of wind, the young man surprises them, sending them flying, shielding herself from the wind. The girl doesn't even see the path the men take as they're thrown behind her. When she turns around, she's shocked to see them knocked out by a single attack. "Oh my goodness," she exclaims. Turning back around, the girl watches him. As she wonders who this guy is, the young man just stands there calm. Before he could say anything else, the troublemakers flee, begging for forgiveness. The girl approaches and thanks him for his help, but he says it was nothing. The young man turns and, noting that they've drawn a crowd, suggests they move away from there. And the girl nods, ignoring the curious stares. Key walks away from the commotion with the young woman following him. With a simple smile, she thinks that the last time someone saved her like that was when she met that person. After a while, they reach a quieter street and continue walking. The young woman gets his attention, and when he looks at her, she thanks him again for his help, saying that thanks to his intervention, things didn't get worse. Asai repeats that there's nothing to thank him for, thinking she seems to be a very considerate person. Looking at her more closely, Kyosuke gets the feeling he's seen her somewhere before. The girl remarks that based on his uniform, he must be a Japanese student, and he nods. Kyosuke explains that he just arrived through an exchange program and was on his way to the training academy. Cheerful, the young woman offers to take him there as a way of thanking him, and he says he would appreciate the gesture. As they cross a bridge, Asai asks if she's traveling the world, and the girl confirms, in a relaxed manner. She says she has her own circumstances and reasons for it. He wonders if they're the same age, reasoning that it's rare for a woman to travel the world alone. Mustering his courage, he asks if it isn't dangerous for her to travel like that. In a playful tone, she replies that it's fine, as she knows a spell or two, despite her appearance. Key then remembers how she had dealt with the thugs. Returning to the topic of the academy, she asks if he really studies there, and Kioski asks, "What's wrong with that?" The girl explains that the school has a rigid merit-based system, and that many students think that way. She continues, describing the institution's hierarchy with a whole system of ranks and points that rewards the best. The young man understands, thinking that it seems to be an even more extreme meritocracy than in Japan. He remembers what Io said. Ingolf holds regular training sessions only for the top students in the class. This means that if he wants to get close to the man, he'll have to earn it. Excited, Asai thinks this is perfect as he loves this kind of challenge. Suddenly, she points to something and says, "They've arrived," gesturing to a huge castle in the middle of several other buildings. The girl announces that this is the Lansing Training Academy. Kioski thanks her, saying he can manage from here, and the young woman thanks him as well, realizing she forgot to introduce herself. She says her name is Shirato Sayuki. Smiling, Asai introduces himself in return and greets her with a handshake. The girl, who was cheerful just a moment ago, freezes for an instant. She repeats his name in a low voice, which confuses him. He asks what's wrong, but Sayuki brushes it off, claiming it's nothing, and that he just has a name similar to an acquaintance of hers. She wishes him luck and resumes her path, and the protagonist says goodbye. He gets the feeling that something about her catches his attention, but he can't quite put his finger on what it is. Turning toward the castle, he concludes it's time to go inside. Now, inside the complex of buildings, the protagonist is walking along the avenues when someone calls out to him and a shadow falls over him. Crouched on top of a wall, a red-haired boy asks if he's the transfer student from Japan. Asai asks if he's some kind of troublemaker, and the other complains, asking who the newcomer is calling a delinquent. Jumping down from where he was, the student says, "It's not every day they get a transfer from Japan, and bets the protagonist must be special," approaching menacingly. He warns him not to get the wrong idea about the place just because of that, stating that this is his welcome ceremony. Kioski sigh, thinking, "Oh, great, I've barely arrived and I already have to deal with some weirdo." Remembering what Shirato said about the merit system, he realizes it's exactly as she described. The guy probably wants to size him up through a duel. Resolute, Kioski drops his backpack on the ground, accepting the challenge, taking some distance. The hothead remarked that it was good to see the newcomer was rational, activating an earth attribute spell. The red-haired boy made rocks spin around him and said it was time to start. "Eat this," he yelled, launching the spell. The stones picked up speed and shot toward the protagonist. With a simple movement of his hands, Asai defended himself with ease, redirecting all the rocks to the side and leaving his classmate in shock. Kioski then activated his own earth magic, commenting that while the number of stones was good, their power was weak, creating an enormous boulder in his hand. He told the boy, "This is how you're supposed to use earth magic." The boulder shot out with a boom, grazing past his opponent, knocked to the ground. The redhead shielded his eyes from the dust as the rock devastated the wall behind him. "An attack should be at least this powerful," Asai finished. Terrified, the classmate looked from the destroyed wall to the protagonist, wondering what kind of powerful monster he was. Kioski just sighed as he looked at his opponent. At the same time, on another street, someone was speaking on the phone. "That's right, Lady Claudia." Holding Kioski's file, the person confirmed that they had made contact with him. Sayuki's face was revealed, and she ended the call, saying she would remain in Germany to observe him. Sometime later, at the Lansing Training Academy in Germany, Asai picked up his new student ID from the administration office. Leaving the office, he figured all the paperwork was finally done, allowing him to enter the local dungeons. Looking at the ID with the automatic translator, the boy noticed it looked different from the one he had in Japan. He saw the points and reflected on the system Shira had mentioned. Concluding that the ID tracked exploration and performance in the dungeons, putting the card away, Asai remembered he had no classes today and decided to explore the German dungeons. As he walked away from the building, someone watched him from afar. It was the red-haired boy silently observing him go. Kioski wasted no time and soon arrived at the entrance of a dungeon in the city. Standing before the portal, he thought that if he wanted to get closer to Ingolf, he would need to climb to the top of the class. Stepping through the portal, he decided he would start accumulating points in this Heil dungeon, realizing he was in a set of ruins. The boy looked around, amused. Asai wondered what kinds of monsters would appear just as a few skeletons approached. Observing them, he noted they were powerful undead, a type he had never seen in Japan. However, he was confident, knowing their weaknesses from his time as Masato, and activated his fire magic. One of the skeletons, wreathed in mana, prepared to attack, The monster lunged forward with a heavy axe swing, but Kioski dodged it with ease. He recalled that the weaknesses of the undead were brute force and fire, and activated his magic again. With his fists wreathed in flames, the boy landed a direct punch on the skeleton, which was split in half by the attack and crumbled to the ground. The sight shocked the other skeleton soldiers. Defiantly, Asai beckoned them to battle. At the end of the fight, with the various bones scattered on the floor, the boy deduced that this must be the path to the boss room. Entering the chamber, the young man remained on alert. He looked at a reaper surrounded by mana and miasma and clears throat, wondered if that was the final boss. The monster's brilliant aura made him reflect on how strong and heavy its presence was. Summoning fire to his hands, he decided to test the main weakness of the undead and launched a fireball at the boss. However, the reaper positioned its staff, ready to receive the blow. The impact of the two mana aurasuras produced an explosion, and Kioski shielded himself from the embers. Looking again, he noticed that the dungeon boss had simply nullified the fireball, confirming it was truly strong. Before the boy could attack again, the reaper prepared its own spell. A blast of purple mana shot out, forming a liquid that Kioska quickly dodged. The boy was surprised to see it. He realized the orb generated a liquid that corroded everything it touched. This was the power of a Heil dungeon. Still, he remained confident, and a smile spread across his face. Watching the reaper cast more spells, he thought he could use this to his advantage. He prepared himself, concentrating wind magic into his feet for a burst of speed, and dodged a sequence of magical attacks. He quickly closed in on the boss, which was suspended in midair, startling it. Copying the boss's acid, the boy challenged it. "Let's see how you handle your own spell." In a fluid motion, he applied the corrosive liquid directly to the reaper, which let out a loud groan of pain. The boss gave one last scream as its face melted. Asai landed back on the ground as the monster remained motionless. When he turned to leave, looking at his own fist, what was once a powerful reaper dissolved into mere flames and soot. He thought that although he had managed to copy the spell, it wasn't a perfect copy because it was high level, and so he had to absorb part of the impact. He concluded that he needed to raise the level of his void attribute as soon as possible. Suddenly, he looks around, his expression serious, sensing something odd. "I know you're there. Show yourself," he declares simply. The young spy laughs and admits, "I thought I hadn't been noticed." The red-haired boy says he was watching the fight and adds that he hopes Kioski doesn't mind. Bored, Kioski asks if his classmate came for another duel, thinking he didn't get the message the other day, observing him more closely. However, he notices something strange about the boy's aura. He concludes that the young man is clearly hiding something as the boy approaches, saying he wants to make things clear. With conviction, the red-haired boy starts to pull something from his pocket. The suspicious action startles Kioski. Already preparing to fight, he thinks the redhead really was hiding something, and wonders if it would be like the duel against Lei. But before anything could happen, his classmate kneels before him, touching his forehead to the ground, and begs to become his apprentice. Utterly shocked, Kioski is left speechless. Wondering what this idiot was trying to do, he looks at the item in the boy's hand and realizes it's a cup. The kneeling boy raises his head and explains that he learned that in Japanese culture, offering a sake cup is a sign of respect. Wondering if this was some kind of joke, the redhead quickly adds that he can help him in exchange for being taught magic. Solemnly, the boy says the fight he just witnessed was insane and that he felt stupid for having challenged him before. Sighing in frustration, Koichiro thinks that things have just gotten complicated. Suddenly, he notices something else he had missed. He approaches the redhead and places a hand on his shoulder, just as the boy curiously asks if he is accepting him as his master. Abruptly, an explosion shatters the ground, and Asai pulls them both out of the blast radius. A skeleton dragon emerges before them. The red-haired boy falls backward in disbelief. Stepping forward, Kioski comments that in the end, the Reaper wasn't the true boss. The skeleton dragon, its mana weighing down the air, glares at Kioski, who simply says that the real challenge has finally arrived. The two young men stare in fear at the gigantic dragon skeleton shrouded in a purple aura. The red-haired boy says he thinks he remembers this monster, explaining he's seen it in manuals. It's a skeleton dragon, a creature that wiped out an entire village ages ago. According to the story, Ingulf barely managed to take it down, and the boy wonders why such a creature would be here. Unfazed, the protagonist says he understands, impressed. The redhead asks if he's really thinking of fighting that monstrosity, but Asai tells him to relax. He then corrects the boy's story. It wasn't Ingolf who defeated the skeleton dragon for the Knights of the Pentagram. Admitting that Masato was the one responsible would have been inconvenient, so they twisted the facts like cowards. With that in mind, the protagonist decides he will kill the monster again. With a determined look and a firm voice, he announces that the fight is about to begin. But the dragon makes the first move, slamming its paw into the ground. Kyo assumes a battle stance, keeping his eyes fixed on the enemy. He dashes forward, pushing off with such force that it creates a gust of wind, and quickly realizes this monster is more powerful than the one from 20 years ago. However, as he dodges its attacks. He thinks that it doesn't matter. Charging toward the enemy's head, he prepares a punch. His hand, wreathed in flames, carries immense energy. The impact of the blow is so powerful it cracks the dragon's skull, and the skeletal head quickly shatters into countless bone fragments that fly through the air. Excited, the red-haired boy begins to celebrate his master's feat. But the battle isn't over yet. As if by magic, the monster begins to regenerate. A skeleton dragon's vitality is far greater than that of other monsters. If not completely destroyed, it will regenerate. Since the enemy is tougher than Kioski imagined, he'll need to adopt a different strategy. Confused, his new apprentice watches his master's every move, not understanding how he can be so calm in the face of such a creature without waiting another second. The skeleton dragon charges toward them, moving its gigantic body. The monster's tail nearly hits the young man, who dodges at the last moment. Immediately after, that whip of bones turns on the protagonist, slamming down on the ground with full force. But Asai dodges the assault as well. For now, the hero is just dodging the opponent's attacks, waiting for the image in his mind to become clearer. This is the essence of void magic, creation through imagination. The clearer the image, the greater the power. As the protagonist prepares his next attack, the monster charges forward and fires a purple beam from its mouth, practically at point-blank range. Worried, his pupil runs toward him, fearing the worst, but his eyes widen when he sees what actually happened. Asai is firmly holding the creature's lower jaw with no difficulty at all. His hand is enveloped in magic, and the monster's teeth can't hurt him. With that, the fight is decided. The protagonist prepares the finishing blow, enveloping the entire skeleton in a blue magic. The energy freezes the monster, which turns into an ice sculpture. Immobile, it no longer poses any threat. Relieved and surprised, the red-haired young man finds it all incredible and is certain that his master is truly powerful. A while later, the two are walking outside as his pupil treats him with extreme respect. Asai asks what it's all about. Ignoring the formality, the protagonist looks at his ID and starts to wonder how many dungeon points one accumulates in a run. He then asks Mateo how much the points really affect the rankings. Mateo explains that for every 10,000 points, a person goes up one class, and to reach the special class, 30,000 points are needed. Unfortunately, dungeon points are a fixed reward. So, since Kioski received 500 points last time, this means he would have to complete dungeons 600 times just to qualify. In other words, reaching the special class will indeed take a very long time. Knowing that his friend intends to achieve this feat, Mateo tells him there's a shortcut to accumulate more points. Hearing this, the protagonist quickly leans in close to his friend, eager to know what this shortcut is. The red-haired young man then explains that the Sublime Celestial Festival will be held in a month. It's an event where students compete in direct battles and designated challenges, and the winner earns an impressive 20,000 points. Upon hearing this, Kioski decides he will do whatever it takes to win and close the gap with Ingolf all at once. Energized, he clenches his fist, already planning his next steps, and declares with certainty that he will take first place in this so-called Sublime Celestial Festival. A month passes since the last events, and finally, the day of the Sublime Celestial Festival arrives. Excited, Mateo smiles at his master, saying that the event is finally happening. Kioski, however, is focused. He thinks that if he can accumulate enough points, he can get into the special class and thus be one step closer to the bastard who betrayed him 20 years ago. The mission for the event's participants is simple. Collect the gemstone at the top of the tower. It doesn't matter what method they use to do it. They can fight or climb straight up. The choice is theirs. The important thing is to show everyone the strength they have accumulated over time. Kioski isn't fazed by the Academy's rules, as he is prepared for anything. The redhead, for his part, is excited and says that the duo will fight hard to achieve their goal. In this festival, only teams of 2 can register, and luckily, our hero already had the perfect partner for the occasion. Suddenly, a person approaches, laughing sarcastically. It's Shirado, who has shown up to watch the protagonist shine a little. Captivated, Mateo approaches and asks if that cutie is Asai's girlfriend, but ends up getting a smack on the head. Something, however, interrupts the friendly reunion. Everyone seems to be surprised by something on the big screen. The image of some important figures appears. One of them is Ingolf, and everyone there is shocked to see him, especially Kiosk. The man is greeted by the Academy staff, who say it is an honor to have him as a guest. The bearded man replies that he is interested in seeing if there is truly great talent among these young mages. Soon, an announcement asks all students to head to the tower. With a serious expression, Kioski walks accompanied by his faithful partner, carefully observing the monument's interior. The 2 young men prepare to start the trial. Suddenly, an explosion in the middle of the students causes a loud bang, and a gigantic wolf with red eyes appears in their midst. It had been announced that some dangerous creatures would be released during the event. When Mateo goes to ask his master what to do next, he realizes the man has simply vanished, and like a flash of lightning, the young man is already striking the monster. He finishes his attack with style, stunning everyone. Kioski turns and asks his partner what's taking him so long. Clearly in high spirits, the redhead replies that he's on his way. On the large screen, the protagonist can be seen running, completely focused. Ingolf notices the young man is Japanese and becomes intrigued. Meanwhile, the other boys watching are surprised to realize the young man defeated the wolf with a single blow. Back at the event, Mateo also demonstrates his skills against the enemies. He still has plenty of energy left, even after defeating an opponent. Because of this, Asai tells him not to lose his rhythm, saying they must continue on their way. As they climb the stairs, however, it's clear that one of them has more stamina than the other. Suddenly, something catches Kioski's attention. He shouts for his friend to wait, and in that same moment, an explosion destroys the steps right next to them. A malicious chuckle is heard nearby. 2 other students have just blocked their progress by destroying the path. They even mock Mateo, saying they can't hear him from all the way up there. Then, the cheating duo continues on, leaving the heroes behind. Desperate, the redhead asks his friend what they're going to do now. But remaining calm, Kioski says, it's simple. They just need to fly to the next step. Mateo doesn't quite understand what his partner meant by that. And before he could comprehend the plan, Ki grabs him by the hand and charges toward the gap. Meanwhile, the 2 cheaters are already near a large door where the final chamber is located. The blonde one says it was easier than he imagined, and the pair remarks that they would never lose to some random Japanese guy. But their conversation is interrupted by Asai, who says he doesn't quite believe that. He explains that the obstacle they created earlier only delayed him a little. Out of breath, but still brave. Mateo says he would never lose to clowns like them. Then the cheating mages begin to charge their powers. Kiosk, however, simply says their movements are too slow, and like a cannonball, the young man shoots past his opponents. The 2 don't even have time to understand what just happened. Soon, they fall to the ground completely unconscious. Impressed, Mateo looks at his friend, thinking he could barely even see him move. As soon as they defeat their opponents, the heroic duo opens the door. Upon entering the room, they can see a shining stone. Excited, the redhead celebrates being the first pair to arrive. But Asai realizes the battle isn't over yet. Around the stone, several summoning circles begin to appear, and then armored knights rise from the ground. One of the event organizers stands up in alarm, saying that those warriors aren't part of the original plan. But with a wicked smile, Ingolf seems to know what's happening. He wants to see if the boys will be able to overcome this test. As Mateo watches, the sinister knights begin to rise from the floor. Kioski realizes that those creatures are certainly not human, which means a single person is using a spell to control all those warriors at once. The protagonist is almost certain it's Ingolf. Far away, one of the supervisors asks if this is really his magic at work. The bearded mage explains that it is more or less since finishing things too quickly would be incredibly dull. He believes that if the boys wish to become good mages, they need to be ready to endure this kind of challenge. Deep down, however, the man knows that no ordinary student could get past this many enemies. With a smile on his face, he eagerly waits to see what the duo has to offer. Back in the arena, Mateo begins to panic. Kyo knows it will be impossible to get the gem without first defeating those opponents. Not only are they numerous, but the enemies also seem quite strong. Even so, the hero understands it's a necessary sacrifice to achieve his goal. Even though he's scared and sweating, his partner Mateo understands there's nowhere to run and decides he'll back him up, even if it's just a little. However, before Mateo can even finish his sentence, Kioski acts fast, narrowly dodging a strike from one of the knights. Another enemy lunges at him, sword raised. But using his body enhancement magic, the boy manages to block the sword strike with his bare hand. Meanwhile, his other hand becomes wreathed in fiery energy. He then strikes the knight, sending it flying through the air. The students watching the trial are all stunned by what they see. Our protagonist continues his assault, using only his hands as weapons, striking 3 enemies at once and sending them flying into the wall. The gust of wind from the blow sweeps through the entire room. Watching from behind the door, Mateo is thrilled to see his master's strength. Golf is also impressed, realizing that Kioski might actually be planning to defeat all the knights by himself. Slamming his hand on the table, the man thinks it won't be that easy. Suddenly, the knights begin to multiply, and more creatures emerge from the ground. Frustrated, Kioski wonders what the school is trying to achieve with all this. Shirato, watching the battle anxiously, still wants to see if the boy can overcome this challenge. Curious about Asai Kiosik's next move. Inside the room, a gigantic axe narrowly misses the boy. There are now approximately 30 enemies in the area, but compared to what the young man has already been through, this is nothing. 2 knights throw their weapons at him, but he manages to defend himself by summoning an earth shield just in time. At the same time, a 3rd enemy charges him. The young man perceives the movement and with his free hand prepares an emerald spell, launching it at his adversaries and hitting them all. Kioski realizes that defeating them one by one is useless. He'll need to wipe them all out at once with a single powerful spell. However, in a situation like this, he doesn't have the luxury of time to charge his attacks. While dodging a knight's charge, he plants a hand on the ground and swiftly moves from side to side, evading the attacks. The best option now is a spell he already knows, as it won't take long to recreate it. Asai hates the bastard who used this magic before, but it's not like he has many choices. Kioski's eyes glow as he activates his void magic. Several small stones on the arena floor begin to float as if in zero gravity. Engulf stands up, impressed by what he's watching. At the same time, Kioski extends his arms and a green energy begins to flow from his body. He unleashes the spell at his enemies, hitting everyone around. It's a fusion of wind and earth magic, which begins to sweep away all the enemies in the area. The power is so immense that a very bright light can be seen from outside the tower. Soon, only pieces of armor are left scattered on the room's floor, and the precious stone is right in front of our hero. Grabbing it firmly, the boy says, "The game is over." Shocked, Mateo shouts that his master did it and starts jumping around excitedly, celebrating the victory. The audience watching the battle also begins to celebrate. Shirato is surprised to recognize the famous fusion magic, realizing the boy's power is even more impressive for being able to execute it. Ingolf starts to laugh, still somewhat stunned. Kioski managed to cast a spell that took Iwako 20 years to develop. Despite being a mere student, that young mage truly seems fascinating. Ingolf decides that if the boy manages to reach a special class, he will make a point of training him personally. Now it is time to announce the student who has been promoted to the express class this semester. Everyone cheers for us as he walks onto the stage. The students in the audience are impressed as the boy was transferred only a month ago. As he listens to the shocked comments, Mateo is extremely proud of his master. On stage, the armband ceremony begins, and for the occasion, there is a special guest. Suspicious. Kioski wonders who it could be. As he suspected, Ingolf starts to walk onto the stage, with a serious and unfriendly gaze. The man observes the students, while the master of ceremonies hands him an envelope. Isai is impressed to see that Ingolf came to the academy in person. But what intrigues him is the reason for his presence there. Smiling, Ingolf says that Kioski entertained him greatly during the Sublime Festival. With a serious expression, the boy replies that it was an honor and takes the paper he is handed. However, Ingolf leans close to his ear and asks him to come to his estate tonight. With a sharp gaze, Mateo notices the man whispering something to his friend. Right after, Ingolf waves to the audience, says his goodbyes, and quickly gets off the stage, leaving Kioski very suspicious about the reason for the sudden invitation. Night falls, and the sky is filled with stars. Upon arriving at the estate, a man in uniform asks Asai to enter, saying they were waiting for him. Anxious, Kioski can only think about what wants to talk about. Or if he has already realized his true identity, Misato Kyoiro, he wishes he'd had more time to prepare because if Ingolf has already discovered the truth, there will be no other choice. After walking a short distance, the young man reaches a door guarded by another staff member who opens it. Kioski braces himself, aware that a fight could break out at any moment. However, upon entering the room, he is met with a huge banquet laid out on the table. Ingolf is cutting a steak and asks the boy to sit, telling him they will talk after the meal. This makes the young man even more anxious as he peers all the possibilities. After dinner, Ingolf began by saying that the young man's deeds during the festival were impressive, especially the battle on the upper floor. Knowing this, there was something he wanted to ask. With a frightening expression, he asked what exactly Kioski was hiding. The question startled Asai, who began to sweat, wondering what Ingolf already knew. Clenching his fist, the boy thought that it didn't make sense. Because if the man truly knew he was Kyo, he would have gotten straight to the point. Ingolf then commented on the fusion spell that Iwako took a lifetime to develop, and asked how the young man could perform it. More relieved, Kioski let out a faint smile and explained that in Japan, he had received special training from Iwako himself. While sipping his tea, Ingolf asked if that was where he learned to use the spell. Asai confirmed, saying he owed everything to his teacher. Smiling, Ingolf remarked that it really sounded like something I would do, and that Kioski had mastered the technique very well. However, he warned him not to abuse this power, or he would end up like Masato Kyoichiro, the man who nearly tore the world apart. Kioski remained silent after hearing the comment. As he stood up, Ingolf said the young man must have heard about the incident from 20 years ago. According to him, Masato drowned in his own power, and in the end, devised a wicked plan, dragging monsters out of their dungeons. He planned to destroy everyone around him, including his own allies. Upon hearing these words, Kioski's eyes widened in shock. The man continued saying that Kyoiro wanted to be the only hero left standing, and so he put his plan into action. Luckily for everyone, they managed to stop him in time. Kioski's hand trembled as he listened to the lies, but he controlled himself to say nothing. Inside, the boy seethed, thinking he couldn't let this go unpunished. Ingolf turned to the young man and said that was why he was warning him, so he wouldn't let his power swallow him. With a firm voice, Asai replied that he knows power is the weapon needed to defeat evil, and that he will do his best to become stronger than anyone. Ingolf's gaze changed as he noticed the perseverance in the young man's aura. He said that just like his actions at the festival, Kioski was truly very interesting, and that such a spirit deserved a reward. The man approached slowly and said that for the next training cycle, he would prepare a sparring partner for him if he was willing. Standing up, Asai said it would be an honor to accept the new challenge. Upon leaving Ingolf's residence, the night outside was bustling. As he walked, the young man realized this was the best reward he could have received. Now, it was just a matter of waiting, for he would crush him with all his might and settle the grudge he had been holding for 20 years. Some time passed, and the day of the special class training arrived. Meanwhile, 2 students were talking about the important day, and one of them mentioned he was jealous of those who would get to meet Ingolf. During their conversation, however, something caught one of the boys' attention. Kioski was sitting on a bench with a look of pure hatred in his eyes. Frightened, the blonde student told his friend they should get out of there quickly. The 2 of them ran off while Asai maintained his scowling expression, thinking that he would finally settle the score. The man had promised he would battle him during today's training. To Ingolf, this was probably just about teaching a quick lesson to a curious student. But for Kioski, it was the chance to crush him and make him regret his betrayal from 20 years ago. Finally, the time for the training to begin arrived. Mister. After Ingolf reached the battlefield and walked slowly observing the students, Asai stared at him with vengeful thoughts. Golf began his speech saying he trusted the students present to have honed their skills, but reminded them that watching is also a form of training. Therefore, today he had decided to spice things up a bit with a sparring match. He told them not to be nervous as he had already chosen his opponent Asake, who stepped forward. Surprised, Mateo watched everything from a distance. To be there, he had to skip class, but he realized it was well worth it. The girl from the Sublime Festival was also watching the training, and it seemed things were going very well between her and her master. Shirado sensed someone watching her, but decided to ignore the feeling, as she was quite curious to see what the young man was planning. The 2 opponents were now ready for battle. Ingolf is one of the strongest warriors among the Holy Pentagram, in a completely different league from Iwako or Lei. Even so, Kioski thought that the one to be defeated today would undoubtedly be the bearded man. Ingolf decided to make the first move. He began to charge energy in his arm, unleashing it forcefully in front of him. The impact of the blow was powerful and sent him flying backward. The other students were surprised, believing it was wind magic. But Shirado realized that the shockwave from the punch alone had torn through the air. The protagonist then wondered if his adversary had used body enhancement magic and decided to prepare a counterattack with earth magic. A gigantic rock emerged from the ground, but Ingolf quickly struck it with a single punch, shattering it into pieces. As he got up, Asai asked if that was body enhancement magic, because the blow had hit him like a truck. Kioski had barely managed to stop the attack with his earth magic. The force behind that punch was truly insane. Grabbing his cape, Ingolf says the boy is mistaken, as he wasn't using any body enhancement magic yet. The protagonist slowly narrows his eyes, trying to understand the situation, channeling an absurd amount of energy. Says this is what he looks like when he's using the enhancement. As he punches the air, a gigantic ball of energy forms and flies toward Kioski. The power is so immense that the boy is momentarily stunned, but he manages to dodge just in time. Tirelessly, Ingolf continues to throw a barrage of punches at his opponent, who scrambles to evade them. Mateo is impressed to see his master, so powerful, being pushed back by these blows. Golf notices that Kioski is escaping using wind magic, but he doesn't give up and throws another powerful punch in a straight line, which Asai narrowly dodges at the last moment. Debris and chunks of the arena fly everywhere as the protagonist dashes across the field. Suddenly, the boy stops, realizing this is not the time to keep retreating. Ingolf becomes thoughtful upon seeing his adversary stop dodging, guessing he might be planning a counterattack. Shirado observes that it's the same strategy the boy used during the festival, the famous fusion magic, which makes its user's eyes glow. Suddenly, all the small stones flying around the arena begin to hurl toward... He brings his hands up high in an attempt to defend himself. The magic is quite powerful, forcing the man to struggle to protect himself. An explosion erupts, sending stones flying everywhere. A lot of smoke rises, but once it clears, we see that Ingolf is unharmed. He managed to mitigate the impact, though with difficulty. It seems the man has grown even stronger in these last 20 years. With a sarcastic smile, Ingolf says that was very good and that he shouldn't be holding back either. A golden energy fills his surroundings like a thunderbolt falling from the sky. Kioski watches the scene with wide eyes. An energetic magic courses through Ingolf's body, illuminating everything around him. Making a taunting gesture, the man beckons his adversary to come and continue the battle. A spell that not even Kioski knew. Something his adversary learned during the last 20 years. Getting into a battle stance, Kioski wanted to see what this was all about. His eyes glowed with a pale violet light as he initiated the fusion spell, conjuring a magic toward his enemy. It was earth magic covering a large area and leaving little room to dodge. The ground beneath Ingolf was shattered in an explosion. As soon as his stance was broken, Asai planned to hit him with the fusion magic. A tsunami of emerald energy was launched in the man's direction. Excited, Mateo cheered for his master, remaining optimistic. Meanwhile, Shirado noticed that Ingolf was losing his balance in the air, making it the perfect time to attack. A true whirlwind of magic was launched at the bearded man, who maintained his posture and a smile on his face, remaining unshaken. He soon began to charge his power, shouting and concentrating. Shocked, Kioski watched his opponent's actions, not understanding what was happening. The man extended his hands toward the magic as if wanting to catch it, and the whirlwind surged forward with full force. Golf's expression changed as if he were exerting an absurd amount of force. As he lowered his arms, the magic passed through him as if it were nothing. Now, on the bearded man's face, there was a sinister smile. Kioski was surprised to see his adversary simply pass through the fusion magic. Shirado also couldn't believe that a spell of that level had been simply nullified. Golf commented that it was truly an excellent blow, but it wasn't able to pierce his mana armor. The golden aura around the man now made perfect sense. It was an energy that acted as armor. Being able to so easily ignore a fusion magic spell without a single scratch proved that the armor possessed insane durability. As he advanced, the bearded man said that this armor did more than just protect him. It transformed his entire body into a weapon, combining offense and defense into one. Then the man charged toward Kioski, preparing his attack. With a leap, he took a higher position, but Kioski dodged quickly, pushing himself backward. The spot where Ingul's punch landed was shattered into pieces. Mateo was dumbfounded at the result, and the impact was so great that a shower of debris flew toward Kioski. Once the dust settled, both opponents were revealed, still standing. Ingulf was indeed much stronger than he was 20 years ago, and his mana armor would be a major obstacle. Asai had already devised a counterattack, but the spell he planned to use was still incomplete, and he wasn't sure if he could even cast it. The bearded man asked if his opponent wasn't going to attack, warning that if not, he would end the battle once and for all. Tense, the protagonist knew he didn't have many options available. Clenching his fist, the young man began to focus his power. Golf noticed his opponent was trying to cast something, but suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. It was as if time around Ingolf had stopped. Countless magical particles swirled through the air as Kyo held his arm outstretched toward his opponent. The bearded man drew closer and with a sweep of his arms canceled the spell, forcefully shoving Kioski backward. Just as he'd suspected, the young man had not yet mastered the technique. Staring down his rival, the boy tried to figure out his next move, but Ingolf's hand lowered. To everyone's surprise, the man said that was enough, declaring it more than sufficient for a sparring match. As he heard Ingolf's words, the boy was trembling. Since the bearded man had called it, everyone concluded the training session was over and went back to their own business. The students began to comment that Asai seemed capable of putting up a fight, but Ingolf had the upper hand the entire time. Mateo approached his friend, praising him for the battle. Kyok realized he had underestimated his opponent. For now, he was no match for him. To change that, he would need to train his void magic further and become even stronger. The people chatting nearby had no idea what kind of potential Asai was hiding. Meanwhile, Ingolf walked across the field where the battle took place, still intrigued by what he had just seen. It had been years since he'd felt such a thrill. The fight had certainly stirred something in both of them, and Ingolf came to the conclusion that Asai was not the type of man who would let things end there. In his room, Ingolf has a drink while watching the sky. It had been a long time since he'd had such a good battle, one that got his blood pumping. However, Asaike was much stronger than he had expected. There was one moment in particular when he truly felt fear. This leaves him pensive, his thoughts drifting back to the last time he felt that same sensation. Back then, Ingolf was kneeling before a man. He asked his opponent if he had been hiding that spell the whole time. The long-haired man replied that he needed to have a trick up his sleeve for the end. As expected, that young man never changed and always exceeded expectations. That's what made them rivals, after all. As he got to his feet, Golf asked his opponent, Kyoiro, for another round. Back in the present, concludes that the alcohol is making him nostalgic. But a tarnished past can't be mended. Still, the thrill of confronting someone on his level was something he sorely missed, which is why Asai Kioski's arrival is so fortunate. For now, Ingolf wants to see everything the boy is capable of. Meanwhile, in a forest, Kioski identifies something familiar. He knows he's still no match for Golf and needs to get much stronger. Fortunately, the dungeon in front of him is perfect for that. The boy then heads inside. The gravity inside is stronger than on the surface. No wonder Ingolf's punches are so powerful. Therefore, the first thing the hero needs to do is strengthen his body. That way, once he can fight Ingolf on equal footing, the spell he's been preparing will be his trump card. Facing a horde of monsters, Kioski thought that Ingolf would just have to wait. 3 days later, back at the academy, the students are following their routine as usual. Shirado notices that Asai hasn't been back to the dorm since the day of the battle. Suddenly, she spots Mateo approaching, looking very tired. In fact, the redhead is extremely bored without his master around. Soon, however, he notices her presence, identifying her as one of his master's fans. The young woman takes the opportunity to ask if he knows Kioski's whereabouts. Mateo explains that he doesn't know the exact location, but he heard his friend was training in the eastern forest. Shirato seems suspicious. She bids the boy farewell and goes on her way, leaving Mateo with the impression that she is a very dedicated fan. Upon arriving at the forest, the girl goes over some information in her mind. There's a hidden dungeon there, perfect for training. But it's strange that Asai would know this. A thought crosses her mind, making her even more suspicious. The possibility that Asayosuke is in fact Misato Kyoichiro. She then remembers that about a month ago, she received a top-secret order to investigate someone who might be Misato Kyoichiro in disguise, and Asai was on the list of people to be investigated. Her thoughts churn with the probability that the boy is really Misato. The young woman starts walking through the dungeon. She has been here before on another mission, and the place is as brutal as she remembers. This makes her wonder if it's true that Asai Kyosuke has been training here. Suddenly, something catches her attention and her eyes widen. A sweaty man with a completely different aura is surrounded by monster corpses. Looking from a distance, he doesn't even look like the same Asai. She wonders if all those monsters were killed by him. This is beyond anything she could have imagined. Upon leaving the dungeon, Shira contacts someone by phone. She reports that by now, the boy may have already reached Ingolf's level of strength. The woman on the other end of the line asks if there's a possibility it's Koichiro. Shirato replies that the possibility is very high. The answer draws a malicious smile from the woman. She looks at the phone and says it's just as she imagined. Before her, many people are kneeling. The woman says that things are starting to get interesting. She opens her arms to her subjects and declares that everything is proceeding as her lord has ordained. We see the shining crystals of the dungeon Kioski chose for his training. After defeating several monsters, the boy declares that his training is complete. This time, he is confident that he will be able to defeat Ingolf. In a dark room, a phone begins to ring. Near the device is Iwako Hideki, one of the Holy Pentagram, who wonders who could be calling. The man decides to answer. On the other end of the line is Ingolf's voice. Iwako's expression remains serious as he recognizes who he's speaking with, and appearing nervous asks if something has happened. Ingolf says he wanted to ask him something about a student named Asai Kyosuke. After the brief exchange of information, Ingolf says he has understood everything he wanted to and thanks him. Cautiously, Iwako places the phone back on its cradle. He is surprised as Ingolf asked about Kyosuke's past, but he cannot reveal that the boy is in fact Kyoichiro. If he did, he would surely die. Far away, Ingolf also hangs up the phone. From the conversation, he realized that Iwako is hiding something, although he has no proof. In that case, he will have to take the next step. As he was leaving the room, something caught his attention. Someone had slipped an envelope under the door. Curious, Ingolf picks up the letter, and upon opening it, his expression changes drastically. He clutches his own clothes tightly as if he had read something terrible. With a furious look, he thinks that he already suspected this. His mind takes him back to the past, to a conversation with Kyoiro on a mountain. The long-haired young man says that since Golf's hometown was destroyed, it's only right that he help him. Golf mentions a dungeon requested by the nation, the conquest of which would be extremely profitable for Kyoiro. Looking at the sky, Kyoichiro says they are just a bunch of bigwigs wanting to show off their power, and that he'd rather be there for the people who really need it. Golf comments that his friend is kind to the bone. Kyoichiro then stands up to look at the landscape, commenting that it's a really nice place. It's Kell Hill, the best spot to watch the sunset. Kyoichiro says he can tell how much Ingolf values this place, but interrupts him, calling his name seriously. He says he really wants to become stronger, not just for his hometown, but also for other places threatened by the dungeons. Smiling, Kyoto says he will join him on this mission, and that he will grow stronger while they are in the country. Ingolf smiles and challenges him to bring it on. After that day, the two friends would joke and have fun, meeting on the hill to challenge each other's limits whenever they had time. But something in his memories bothers him. The scene of the city in flames comes to his mind. He was running desperately to escape the flames, and then he saw something that shocked him like never before. Kuro was standing amidst the fire, watching everything burn with a malicious smile. The smile of a true villain. Ingolf decides he will not involve Nathaniel, Claudia, or the rest of the Holy Pentagram in this. He himself will be the one to put an end to Kyoiro. Far away, our protagonist walks calmly through the school hallways. The next periodical training is in 1 week. It will be his rematch against Ingolf. A call interrupts his thoughts. It's Mateo calling for his master. The redhead comes running, excited and happy to see his friend back. He's in a hurry as the headmaster asked him to deliver a letter. Mateo does so, and Asai seems a bit confused by the envelope, but he quickly opens it to find out what it's about. The letter's contents leave him in shock. When Mateo leans in to see what's written, Kioski nimbly closes the envelope. He turns his back on his friend, saying it's nothing. The attitude makes the redhead find the situation strange. Meanwhile, someone is spying on them from behind the pillars. It's Shirado, who seems to be plotting something. In a lush green field, Golf waits patiently.
When Kyosuke approaches, the man notices his presence. The two meet on Kell Hill, and the reason for the meeting is clear.
Golf already knows who Kyosuke really is. The boy is in fact Masato Kyoichiro.
Unfazed by his secret being discovered, the protagonist asks the reason for this meeting. Golf turns toward his former friend and asks if it isn't obvious. Charging energy in his body,
He gets into a battle stance and says he is there to erase Masato's existence from this world.
while also charging energy in his hands, the young man replies that the feeling is mutual and that he will send him to hell first.
Before they begin their clash, Kyosuke says he wants to ask something. He asks how the man discovered his true identity. Masato Kyoiro, the bearded man, replies that this is information he wouldn't need to know. But he will tell him anyway. He reveals that this has nothing to do with the holy pentagram. It's a purely personal matter, and that's why he chose this location. This time, Ingolf states that he won't make any mistakes and that he will never forgive him for the atrocities he committed. With a sarcastic smile, Kyosuke replies that in that case, they're on the same page. The adversaries face each other, and the battle aura between them begins to grow.
As seen in the simulated battle, Ingolf's mana armor is capable of blocking all types of attacks, whether magical or physical.
This means that in his view, Koichiro has no chance of winning. Ingolf charges toward his opponent, unleashing a powerful punch and then launching spells through his strikes. The attacks begin to close in on the protagonist. Confident, the man wonders what his enemy will do. In the previous battle, all the boy could do was dodge. If that's still the case, all he needs to end the fight is to hit him with another shockwave. To his rival's surprise, Kyosuke charges forward. He runs toward him with a confident and firm gaze, leaving Ingolf surprised by the assault. The boy is coming at him with everything at full speed while charging his emerald wind magic. He fires a gigantic tornado at his opponent, while with his other hand he charges flaming energy ready to deliver a powerful punch. The two fighters' hands meet in a thunderous blow. The impact throws both of them backward. Kyosuke tries to regain his balance after the shock, and confirms that as he imagined that armor is truly hard as a rock. Besides resisting his blows as if they were nothing, Golf's attacks are stronger than before. Meanwhile, Ingolf also realizes that Asai is different. He has been training, but that's probably not all. From what he can observe, the boy is copying his mana armor, which makes him extremely furious, considering the attitude pathetic.
Ingolf says he has figured out the trick behind the boy's magic. The so-called void magic is just about copying other people's spells. However, an imitation is merely an imitation, and those tricks won't work against him.
He admits, though, that time magic is truly something to be admired, a type of technique he used to revere. But Kyosuke is not the same as before. He has fallen far and will never be able to break his mana armor. With his eyes blazing and overflowing with energy, Ingolf is extremely confident. Asai replies that copying is close to what his void magic does, but it's not exactly that. His magic goes far beyond. It took him a while to realize, but now he can show its true power. Ingolf recognizes the stance as the same one the boy tried to use for his last blow in the simulated battle, but it doesn't matter. The man takes the initiative and advances, confident that no spell known to mankind can pierce his armor. He rushes his opponent, preparing a punch while Asai continues to charge his void magic. Ingolf unleashes his attack with everything he has toward the protagonist. Before the blow hits him, something happens. Blood splatters through the air. Ingolf feels something strange in his body. The arm he used to attack is severely injured. Though it seemed impossible, the boy managed to pierce his armor. Ingolf is in disbelief as he has never heard of anyone who had accomplished such a feat. Kyosuke says he warned him. Void magic isn't just about copying. Shocked, Ingolf's eyes widen as he stares at his opponent. Suddenly, Asai is holding a flaming sword, shouting. Ingolf asks what the hell this means. The essence of void magic is to create through imagination. And now, Ingolf will feel that power on his own skin. Still shocked, Ingolf asks if Kyosuke's magic is born from imagination, since the young man created a flaming sword out of thin air. And that's precisely it. The sword was made specifically to break the mana armor, an original creation that exists nowhere else. Despite seeing it with his own eyes, the man is in disbelief, unable to understand how a mere blade could pierce his powerful armor. Kyosuke notices his opponent's confusion, who had previously boasted that his armor could block any attack. Furious, Ingolf insists it's impenetrable, but Kyosuke reveals a blind spot in his magic. Its attribute converts mana into metal. Shocked, Ingolf asks how he knows that. Kyosuke replies that since he had just used the same technique, he was able to figure it out. After all, no matter how hard a metal is, it's not invincible. That's why he created a sword with an ultra-high temperature capable of melting metal. Dumbfounded, Ingolf remembers his armor had defended him from various spells, including fire, which makes him question the blood's temperature. With a firm voice, Kyosuke warns that he will have to accept reality. He can no longer stop his attacks.
Gritting his teeth, Ingolf warns him not to be underestimated, saying a new trick doesn't guarantee victory.
He charges forward and as he readies a punch, yells that he will crush all that arrogance. Striking the flaming blade directly, with a steady gaze, Kioski defends the attack, holding his magic sword tightly. Then he swings it with all his might, throwing his enemy far away. Wounded by the impact, Ingolf loses his balance and falls to the ground in a crouch. In disbelief, Ingolf can't accept what is happening. Kioski taunts him, saying that when he gets emotional, his movements become idiotic and easy to predict, an old habit he has never gotten rid of. The words infuriate the man. He throws a sudden punch, yelling for Kioski to shut up. But all the energy is wasted as Ki easily dodges. Ingolf, however, doesn't give up and attacks again, yelling for Kioski not to dare speak of his past. With eyes full of hatred, he continues trying to land his blows and bellows that it was Kioski who burned his homeland to ashes. The accusation shocks the young man, who tries to set the record straight. But the hatred in Ingolf's heart is so great that he no longer listens. Seeing no other way, Ki decides to use another trick. He begins to charge blue energy in his hand, and swinging his arm horizontally, unleashes a blow that causes an explosion of lightning and smoke between them. With his vision compromised,
Ingolf still tries to prepare another attack, but is surprised by the tip of the flaming blade at his neck.
Ki could end the fight right there, but merely holds the weapon, observing his rival with an intense and serious gaze. Nervous, Ingolf begins to sweat. He closes his eyes and asks why it all had to be this way, saying he thought Kioski would be a good rival, someone who would help him surpass his limits.
He questions why things didn't turn out that way, with a serious expression.
Kioski prepares to answer, but a mysterious projectile interrupts the conversation.
Hitting Ingolf squarely in the back of the neck, he falls to the ground with no time to defend himself.
In disbelief, Kioski tries to understand what happened, but his rival is already on the ground as a woman approaches,
holding a crossbow. She says she won't allow him to conclude things so soon. Kioski watches her with hatred in his eyes.
It's Claudia, one of the pentagram saints. The woman greets him, saying it's been a while since she's seen Kyoichiro, revealing she also knows his true identity. With a smile on her face, she says she'd love to catch up, but that won't be possible right now, as the real fun is just beginning. A magical aura from Claudia begins to wash over Ingolf, and his body rises slowly. Now he moves against his own will. The imposing woman gives a direct order for the two of them to kill each other. With an empty voice, Ingolf replies that her will shall be done. The wind blows, making Claudia's hair flutter as someone approaches to inform her that it's time. Seeing who is approaching, Kioski's expression changes drastically. Next to the blonde woman is Shirato Shuki. Shocked, the young man asks why she's reporting to Claudia.
However, before he can get any answer, the woman orders the two rivals to fight until their hearts are content.
With a shout, Kioska tries to call out to Claudia, but to no avail. The violet aura coursing through Ingolf's body intensifies, and Kioska tightens his grip on his flaming sword.
Possessed by Claudia, the man begins to rise, letting out an agonizing scream as his mana armor manifests to defend him.
With a serious expression, the hero realizes his adversary is not in his right mind. Claudia has likely hypnotized him with her magic, a perfect hypnosis. Ki has used a copy of this ability on Yoichi before and knows that if it's the same magic, dealing with the situation will be very complicated. Regardless, he has no choice but to fight. Suddenly, Ingolf bellows in despair and lunges at Kioski with tremendous speed. Asai decides to use the same plan as before. Remain calm and read his rival's movements. He plants his feet firmly on the ground, bracing for the swift attack. As the bearded man strikes, the protagonist manages to dodge, but he's caught off guard by the following punch, taking a direct hit and being thrown backward. Our hero is surprised by the amount of force in that attack, but he quickly manages to recover and get back on his feet. Now a little more tense. Observing calmly, he notices that Ingolf's hand is severely injured. The man's arm, which was already hurt, is now being used in battle as if it were nothing, and his muscles are swelling abnormally. They say the human subconscious always holds back some strength, so perhaps Claudia's hypnosis has removed that limitation. Just as expected from the woman known as the Queen of Mind Control, Ingolf's speed is also at an absurd level, and Kioski realizes he needs to end this battle as quickly as possible. Carefully calculating his next moves, Kioski watches his enemy, aiming his sword firmly at his rival's body. As soon as Ingolf takes the first step, Asai readies himself, targeting the man's legs. The attack is successful, and the young man manages to wound his adversary, feeling a bit more optimistic. However, even with his legs severely wounded, doesn't stop moving. With his swollen and injured arm, he throws a powerful punch toward the hero, who barely manages to dodge at the last second, preparing a counterattack with his sword.
Kioski is impressed to see that even after all those blows, the man keeps trying. Suddenly, the aura controlling him begins to change, and his reaction becomes different.
Asai watches carefully, waiting for the next insane moves. With a series of agile movements, he manages to dodge an abrupt punch, staying firm on the ground and positioning himself to defend against the next attack. However, the young man can't understand what's happening. It seems in great pain, and the miasma around him is slowly fading, as if the hypnosis is failing. But it's not like Claudia to let something like this slip. If she planned to use Ingolf, she would have made sure everything was perfect. Something doesn't feel right. But Kioski decides to put those thoughts aside for later. With his own mana armor failing, it's time to play his final card.
Holding his flaming sword, the protagonist charges his adversary, running as fast as he can to seize the opening. Ingolf, who still seems to be fighting the mind control, notices Kioska's approach and also tries to attack him.
A massive boom echoes across the battlefield as their two blows clash. With his hands severely injured, Golf retreats slightly, dropping his sword. Kioski brings his hands together to charge his finishing spell, concentrating to blast a shockwave directly at his rival. The spell hits square in the chest, and the accumulation of energy at the impact point causes an intense noise. After a few seconds, all that remains is silence. Golf is out of energy, brought down and held up by a sigh. Still alive, he admits his defeat. Kioski agrees, saying he has won the battle again. The bearded man laughs and says the young man still talks a big game. He adds that fighting really made his blood boil, but exchanging spells made him think of something. It wasn't Kioski who was responsible for burning down his hometown. Immediately after, Ingolf faints, remaining on the ground. Unsettled by the accusation, Kioski asks what the man meant by that. Night falls and a bonfire is lit to keep the area warm. Slowly, Ingolf opens his eyes and Kioski sees that he has finally woken up. The bearded man calls him by the name Kyoiro, and showing his bandages, asks if the young man was the one who applied them. Kiyosuk confirms, explaining that they are just basic bandages to prevent the wounds from worsening. The redhead questions the reason for the help, since the two are rivals. Eisai replies that something is on his mind. Before fainting, Ingolf mentioned that Quichiro wasn't the one responsible for burning down his hometown, and he wants to understand more about that. Kioski says he heard that someone reduced that village to ashes 20 years ago, and asks if the culprit was never found. Sensing the intention in his rival's tone, the bearded man decides to explain what happened. 20 years ago, just 1 week before the calamity with the SSS class dungeon, he was certain of what he saw: the silhouette of Quichiro burning his homeland. Surprised, Kioski listened to the story, his shock plain on his face.
Ingolf confessed that at first he didn't want to believe what he was seeing, as he never imagined his rival would be capable of such an atrocity.
However, amidst thousands of people burning and trying to escape, the silhouette of a man identical to Masato was laughing uncontrollably. Kioski tried to process the information, certain he would never do such a thing, and wondering who Ingolf could have seen. The situation grew more complicated when Ingolf revealed that shortly after the incident, an elaborate plan to assassinate everyone was found in Masato's room. The revelation shocked Kioska, his eyes widening. All the holy pentagrams began to say that Masato Kyo was a wolf in sheep's clothing, and Kiosuke already knew the result of that all too well. He knows his rival isn't lying, which means someone orchestrated everything. The image Ingolf saw was likely a fabrication created by that same person. Tampering with the senses and implanting false memories was the specialty of someone who quickly came to his mind.
Claudia, the master of hypnosis and mind control.
Since Kioski had copied her spells before, he knew exactly how they worked. Looking at his rival, Kioski was about to share his suspicion, but Ingolf seemed to have the same insight. He realized the spell Claudia had used on him earlier wasn't to help him. If she could implant a command to fight to the death, then preventing someone from verifying the facts would be no trouble at all. Ingolf looked at his old friend.
Already understanding where the conversation was headed, Claudia had made him confuse Kioski with the person who burned the village. That would explain everything.
As he stood up, the bearded man said that, in any case, he owed him an apology for being mistaken about Kyoichiro and for unjustly accusing him. Touched by his sincerity, Kioski just watched. Ingolf continued saying that for not having trusted his friend, he deserved to suffer the consequences. He pulled a small dagger from his pocket, handed it to Eisai, and asked him to end his life right there, burying his body on that very spot because that's what he deserved. Kioski remained silent for a moment, observing his rival's demeanor. Then, in a firm voice, he called Ingolf's name and asked him to look at the landscape from the hill, asking if it didn't remind him of the times they used to train together. Moved, the bearded man watched his friend. They were brothers in arms, and a bond like that wasn't easily broken. The person who tried to destroy it didn't deserve to remain free. After all, they now had a common enemy. Kioski extended his hand and invited Golf to join him on this journey. The gesture surprised Golf, but Kioski knew that holding a grudge wasn't his style. The redhead cracked a friendly smile and agreed with everything his old friend had said. The two shook hands, and for an instant, it was as if they had gone back 20 years in time to when they were still good friends, aware that they still had much to do. Sometime later, with the campfire extinguished and only smoke remaining, they decided to head for the Mediterranean.
Supposedly, Claudia had built a city for her followers there, which must be serving as her base. Ingolf started to suggest a plan, but Kioski cut him off.
He explained that Claudia surely thinks one of them died in the previous battle, and they would use that information to their advantage. The woman believed that taking down one of them would be enough. It was time to show her she was mistaken. For Eisai, it would be easier to act if Claudia thought he was dead. Therefore, it was best for Ingolf to continue his life as a holy pentagram as usual. Considering that Nathaniel's movements were also obscure, Kioski said he was counting on his friend's strategies. Golf replied in a firm voice that he could count on it. Suddenly, something caught Kioski's attention, and he looked up. Many things had happened, but the next step was clear. He would make Claudia regret deceiving and pay for everything she had done so far. Arriving at the coast, a seagull flew over a beautiful sea. Our hero leaned on the ship's rail, startling the bird as he thoughtfully reflected on everything that had happened in Germany. Mateo's melancholy farewell and the turn of events involving Ingolf were still fresh in his mind. Kios never imagined the situation would end so favorably, but there was no time for sentimentality. Now his adventure was taking him to the islands in the middle of the Mediterranean. The destination was the island where Claudia had gathered her followers and built her own city. Although it seemed too obvious, it was the woman's most likely whereabouts. Since it was a city of believers, the best way to enter would be to infiltrate by pretending to be one of them. To do that, he would need to use his void magic. Asay cast the presence-concealing spell to hide himself. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Aboard the ship, a well-dressed gentleman smoking a cigar approached and asked if the young man was also going to worship Borgasm. Kiosuk deduced that this was the name of the religion founded by Claudia and confirmed. The man showed admiration for the boy's young age, yet great devotion. He mentioned that he wished for a personal audience with Claudia and had therefore brought a generous offering, since only high-ranking followers could meet with her. Ki listened to the man's advice, remaining attentive, and remembered that this religion tended to rank its followers. A voice over the loudspeaker announces that the ship will be docking soon and that everyone should prepare to disembark. When the man turns to speak with Kioski again, the boy has already vanished in the blink of an eye. The mustached man is confused as he could have sworn he was talking to someone, yet he can't remember what the person looked like. This confirms for Asai that his spell truly worked. Finally, the time had come to settle the 20-year-old debt with Claudia. The city is filled with old exposed brick buildings, and upon seeing the landscape, Kioski is left speechless, just like the other people around him who pull out their phones to take pictures. At the center of it all, a gigantic tower rises, so tall that even looking up, it's impossible to see its end. It's truly immense, larger than any skyscraper. They say that inside the Borgo Tower, there is an entire city for its faithful. Kioski overhears the conversation of some men nearby and remembers that 20 years ago, Claudia had only a small monastery on this site. Now she had built a true metropolis. If the tower is this enormous, the number of followers must be insane, which is perfect for infiltrating unnoticed. The security seems tight, but that's not a problem since he possesses the void spell. Passing through the metal detector and security, no abnormalities are detected. The young man is accepted as a first-rank Borganist and receives his credentials. Each rank determines the floor a person will stay on, and since he is first rank, he will be on the lower floors. To ascend, one must pass a few tests. If Kioski can reach the 7th rank, he will get an audience with Miss Claudia. The protagonist passes through a large gate to enter the tower. The place is elaborate and has immense corridors. Kioski thinks that his forged identity worked, and that the guards won't remember a thing because of the spell. Suddenly, he stops walking. Through the window, he can see the city of the faithful. The young man now crosses a large bridge connecting 2 towers. Throughout the city, gigantic monuments and statues can be seen. It's hard to believe such a large place exists inside a tower. Asae passes through an alley and comes out onto another street. But something catches his attention, and he looks to the side. Some guards are blocking a person's path. It's the mustached man he spoke with earlier on the ship. He looks very irritated. The guard stands firm and says that first-rank individuals cannot pass through there. However, the man shoves him aside, saying he doesn't care and that he needs to meet Claudia no matter the cost. But as he runs, an energy grabs his feet, transforming into a gigantic bolt of lightning that strikes him down. The poor man falls unconscious to the ground, and the soldiers scratch the back of their necks as if they had no other choice. This makes Kioski understand that brute force won't work against the security. Claudia is probably at the top of the structure, which means he'll have to rank up first and complete whatever challenges this religion imposes on him. Determined, our hero concludes that he will climb the sex hierarchy, starting from the bottom. Elsewhere in the city, in a very tall tower, a man bows to Father Samoa, handing him a list of all the new faithful so he can choose the day's challenges. The priest grumbles, saying they are just new little lambs arriving, so it will be up to him to test them once again. While resting on a park bench, our protagonist reflects that infiltrating the tower was a breeze. The next step is to complete whatever tests they give the faithful to, then raise his rank. Suddenly, a white dove with a letter tied to its leg approaches him. The message instructs the newest faithful to head to the North Mansion on the 1st floor. With a confident smile, the boy realizes he has received his first test. Excited, he stands up, thinking he's going to ace the test, whatever it may be. At the designated location, a few young people, the new faithful, are gathered. Samoa introduces himself as the priest responsible for supervising the new disciples, and says he would like to hear the reasons that brought them to the tower. The first to answer is a young woman with short hair who seems a little frightened, shyly. She explains that she came because she wishes to meet Claudia. Her village has been plagued by a mysterious illness and her grandmother is bedridden. Therefore, the girl hopes that Claudia might lend her power to solve the problem. Kiyosuk observes the girl, thinking that coming here for her family and her town is truly admirable. However, other young people begin to mock her dirty clothes and the fact that she aims to reach the top of the tower. Samoa interrupts asking the gossipers if there's something funny and if they too don't wish to meet Claudia. The two confirm and embarrassed apologize for the first scolding. Samoa then explains that although everyone wants to meet the master, climbing the tower is no easy task. He throws out the numbers 1 year and 99. 1 year is the time it takes to climb from the first to the second rank, and 99% is the elimination rate on the very first floor. Many come to the tower seeking hope, but most end up being crushed. Still, he concludes, aiming high is a noble attitude.
Getting straight to the point, the priest announces the first of 3 challenges. Go to the dungeon on the northeast of the island and kill 500 monsters.
Upon hearing the number, the young people are dumbfounded. He explains that the monsters there drop stones when defeated, and collecting them will be proof of the task's completion. There is no time limit, allowing them to progress according to their abilities. With that, the priest finishes his instructions, saying he expects good results. The boys who had been gossiping look at each other, worried. But the girl in humble clothes maintains a firm and determined gaze. Kiyosuke also notices something special about her. Later, as the young woman is walking, he approaches and says he didn't expect to hear those words. She recognizes him from the meeting and asks what he didn't expect. Ki replies that while everyone was shocked by the test, she didn't even blink. Closing her eyes, the young woman admits that she is scared. Yes, but she has no choice as she needs to help her village. With a smile, she asks if he is also aiming high. Deep down, Kiyosuke knows there is something different about that girl, but he feels it would be useless to try and figure it out now. Night falls over the tower. Elsewhere, the mustached man from before thanks Samoa at a counter, excitedly holding up a necklace with the number 2, happy to have increased his rank. The priest comments that he should see it as divine providence. The man walks away whistling, holding a briefcase under his arm. Alone, as a butler serves him a glass of wine, Samoa reflects on his scheme. He raises the bar to impossible levels with absurd trials so that no one can advance, forcing the desperate to progress by offering money. The Northeast Dungeon has extremely powerful monsters, making the task impossible for the weak. Those who can't gather the necessary money can cling to their lost dreams until they fall apart. Thinking about this, the priest begins to laugh compulsively and maliciously. Meanwhile, our protagonist climbs to a higher spot to take in the view and ends up hearing the laughter. It's the typical sound of a villain, of someone who exploits people to the very last drop. He realizes that while some disciples genuinely seek a meeting with Claudia out of pure faith, the priests are just taking advantage of them. The next day, Samoa is in his office handling paperwork when someone knocks on the door. He asks who it is, and Kiyosuke enters, apologizing for the intrusion. To make a long story short, the young man says he has already finished the test and places a very heavy pouch on the table. Inside are the purple stones that the monsters drop when killed. In disbelief, Samoa's eyes widen. Unable to believe what he's seeing, he tries to play it cool, congratulating the boy on his incredible feat with a sly smile. Kai calls the priest's name and warns him that if he doesn't want people to hear his dirty secrets, he'd better close the windows. The statement leaves the priest visibly frightened. The priest wonders what the boy could have heard the night before. With trembling hands, his fear turns to anger. As the purple stones roll across the floor, he decides he will not let some upstart do as he pleases in his domain. With hatred in his eyes, Samoa vows that this city will become the boy's grave. During the night, in a high castle with its great tower, Samoa was restless, lost in thought. Kiyosuke's appearance just to deliver that spot-on criticism was extremely insulting. Perhaps the boy had done it to try and warn him, but in his view, there was nothing more pathetic than cheap justice. Letting out a sarcastic smile, the priest had an idea. He would give a second task, especially for that cheeky little believer. A short distance away in the disciples' dormitory, our protagonist was looking thoughtfully out the window. As he put on his coat, he reflected that Samoa had not yet made a move. The priest probably wouldn't be naive enough to do something rash inside the tower. Suddenly, a pigeon landed on his windowsill holding a letter on its foot. The note detailed the second task and asked the young man to proceed to the indicated location. Kiyosuke immediately understood that the plan was to get rid of him in a way that would look like just another mission. For Samoa, it would be like killing 2 birds with 1 stone, testing a disciple while at the same time eliminating the thorn in his side. According to the letter, the test consisted of defeating a dungeon boss. Although it was clearly a trap, Kiyosuke didn't care and decided to dive headfirst into the challenge. Soon, he arrived at the lava cave dungeon on the southern island of Bourgeois. As soon as he stepped inside, the young man felt the intense heat. It was clear that Samoa wanted him dead for discovering his corruption. so this dungeon was bound to be extremely difficult. It was also possible that the priest had a plan B. Knowing this, Kioski needed to think of one as well. As he was concentrating, something caught his attention. A large explosion erupted from the lava, and in the blink of an eye, monsters appeared before him. They were flaming dinosaurs, high-level creatures that roamed in packs, just as expected from a Heil dungeon. But our hero came prepared. He quickly activated his void magic, hitting all the dinosaurs with blasts of ice that pierced through their bodies. The training for the fight against Ingolf was finally paying off. After passing the first challenge, the young man continued on his way. But he noticed someone was following him, a mysterious hooded man who kept his distance so as not to be noticed.
Far away, someone was talking with Samoa about the controversial disciple.
Cornered, the man argued that if the boy managed to finish the first test in a day, he might be able to defeat the dungeon boss. The priest, however, was confident that wouldn't happen, as no higher-ranked disciple had ever accomplished such a feat. And in any case, he had already taken precautions, also sending a professional assassin who wouldn't let the boy escape. Much to his companion's surprise, in the dungeon, however, the assassin who had been sent was utterly shocked to see Kioski defeat the boss in an instant. In any case, the boy hadn't noticed him yet. It doesn't matter how strong a person is if they can't react to an ambush, the assassin thought. Advancing toward the hero, he raised his dagger, preparing a surprise attack. But suddenly, he fell flat on his face, feeling as if something was stopping his movements. It was then he realized his legs were completely frozen. Trying to break free, the man was bewildered. Not understanding how the protagonist knew where he was, Kioski approached, saying that those who hunt are always careless about the possibility of being hunted themselves.
A few magical butterflies were flying around the assassin.
It was a tracking spell that Kai had cast as soon as he entered the dungeon, allowing him to quickly locate his pursuer. Approaching the bandit, Asai grabbed him by the collar and in a sarcastic voice said, "It's a shame your plan didn't work out." Sometime later, back in Samoa's room, the priest received a package. Inside was a severed hand. Startled, he stared at the morbid delivery just as the troublesome disciple returned. Alive, the boy commented that he hadn't expected the dungeon boss to be so strong. And as if that weren't enough, a hooded man had appeared wanting to kill him, apparently on someone's orders. In a sarcastic tone, the young man said he was curious to know who would do such a thing. Then he turned his back and stated he was looking forward to the third test. The priest was confused as to why the young man didn't report the assassination attempt. But then an idea formed in his mind. Asai probably didn't have any concrete proof yet, or perhaps he thought reporting such a thing would tarnish his reputation. In that case, Samoa would have to execute him with his own hands, even if the boy was stronger than expected. With the ring given to him by Claudia, he could surely erase the boy's existence. During the night, two young men were walking down the street. One of them was lamenting not having reached the goal again, saying that things had gotten brutal since Samoa became the priest. The other, a blonde young man, commented that although he had managed to escape his homeland, at this rate, he might never reach the second rank. Upon hearing the conversation, Kioski's expression changed. Nearby, two soldiers were guarding an entrance, looking very bored. Suddenly, the protagonist approached and with a friendly smile asked if he could ask a question.
After a brief conversation, Kioski thanked them for the information and said goodbye, leaving the two guards with a strange feeling, since the young man had asked specifically about the day a high-ranking priest would come for an
A few days later, a small white dove landed on his window, carrying a note about the contents of the final test of the first layer. Confident, Kioski believed that Samoa scheduling the test for that specific day only proved his desperation. Outside his room, he activated his void magic, creating several doves that took flight, startling the passers-by. Each bird held a letter in its feet. As soon as they took the papers, the citizens began to read them. Even a girl in humble clothes received a note. One of the doves flew over a person with long white hair who was walking through the city and also delivered a letter to them. After executing his plan, Kioski felt that everything was going as it should. The time had come for Samoa to suffer the consequences for treating the faithful like trash. A short time later in the Colosseum, the protagonist and the priest faced each other. Looking at the young man, Samoa asked if he was ready for the final test. Kioski replied that he was, and that he felt honored the priest had come in person. Samoa realized that Kioski Asai was playing innocent, as he knew the boy had not only overheard his plans that night, but also knew he was the one who sent the assassin. The first layer of the tower was his territory, and the priest would do whatever it took to eliminate the boy.
With a sarcastic smile, Kioski commented that it seemed they would have a large audience today.
The priest looked back and saw a crowd approaching. Everyone there had been invited by the letters to watch Kioski's final test. Soon, the entire Colosseum was packed with curious people. Impressed, Samoa looked around and realized it was the boy who had brought all these people, wondering what he could be plotting. Suddenly, the protagonist began to shout for all to hear, revealing the corruption of Priest Samoa. He exposed the man's schemes, forcing impossible tests and only approving those who paid bribes, not to mention the assassin sent to kill him. The crowd's reaction was one of pure shock, and the priest became enraged. With little else to do, he took a deep breath and tried to deny the accusations, saying it was all a lie. Inwardly, however, Samoa feared the boy had some concrete proof. He decided then to start the test immediately because a dead man can't talk. The priest summoned a series of monstrous creatures to attack Kioska, impressing the audience with his summoning ability. With a glazed look in his eyes, Samoa warned that if the boy survived his magic, he would become a faithful of the second layer. However, he was certain the young man wouldn't be able to withstand such a powerful force. Determined to pass the trial, our hero activated his void magic, which instantly froze all the monsters around him, leaving Samoa dumbfounded at the scene. With a smile on his face, Kioski apologized, saying that no one had told him he couldn't defeat the creatures. The people in the stands began to shout wildly, and even the girl in simple clothes was impressed by what she saw. Angrily, Samoa clenched his fists, thinking the boy shouldn't be so full of himself. He would not allow trash like him to disrupt his peace. Then, the priest took a ring from his pocket and put it on, believing the item would make him much more powerful. Kioska noticed the man's movement in the jewel. Raising his hand, Samoa shouted for the boy to bring it on as he was about to get a demonstration of his true power. The ring began to glow with a scarlet energy, but suddenly, nothing happened. Silence fell over the Colosseum. The people stood frozen, not understanding the situation, and some began to mock, saying that this nothing must be the priest's true power. With a trembling hand, Samoa grew impatient, as the ring was supposed to grant him immense power. However, a voice approached and explained that the ring does not work for people with an impure heart, which seemed to prove that the boy's accusations were not lies. Kioski's expression changed as he realized an illustrious figure had just arrived. Samoa was also shocked to see the man with long white hair there. It was Lord Agito Norman, a priest from the 5th layer. The newcomer turned to Samoa and said that if a priest cannot use the ring, it means there is a dark story behind it. With a pale face and dying of fear, Samoa would now have to explain himself. Agito stared at Samoa with a look of disapproval, which made the corrupt priest tremble with fear. Kioski observed the situation, surprised that such a high priest had appeared, but concluded that this would make things even more interesting. The long-haired man explained that upon arriving at the 1st layer, he had received a rather strange message. Confused, Samoa asked what message that would be. Agito revealed that the message said someone would expose the corruption of the 1st layer's priest, and that everyone who wanted to see for themselves should come to the arena. This information made the priest turn ashen-faced. Agito declared that the arrogant and corrupt man would be punished according to the doctrine. Samoa realized the boy had remained silent all this time, only to reveal the truth now. Even so, he believed there couldn't be any concrete proof. So, he decided that keeping his mouth shut was the best way to escape. Swallowing hard, Samoa made his move. In a desperate voice, the priest claimed that the accusations of corruption were surely a mistake. He called himself a man extremely devoted to Claudia, and swore on his life that he would never do anything shameful. Agito then questioned him. If that were true, why didn't his ring work? He explained that the ring not only brings out the user's hidden power in proportion to their faith, but it also has another function. If someone with impure intentions tries to use it, a signal is transmitted directly to a higher-ranking priest. The people in the stands gasped upon hearing that. Kiyosuk realized the ring was also a tool to catch traitors. With a calm smile, Agito gently asked Samoa to explain what was happening. Not knowing what to say, the priest could only beg them to believe him. Agito let out a sigh of disappointment. With a firm voice and an intimidating gaze, he ordered Samoa to tell the truth. The sudden change in his superior's demeanor frightened the man. Agito reminded him that earlier the priest had interrupted the boy and forced the test to begin, which in itself was suspicious enough. Stammering, Samoa no longer knew how to defend himself. Agito continues declaring that Samoa will no longer disgrace the name of the Burgo faith. Now speechless, the corrupt priest can only stare with wide eyes. Agito leans down, getting face-to-face with him, and says he could forcibly extract a confession, asking if Samoa would be willing to experience it firsthand. With an expression of pure fear, the man remains quiet, but soon closes his eyes, understanding he has nowhere left to run. He confesses to imposing impossible trials on the faithful and extorting money from some of them. The people in the stands are utterly shocked by the confession. Isai, unsurprised, simply puts his hands in his pockets. Agito orders the guards to remove the man from the arena, and Samoa is dragged away across the floor. The long-haired man turns to the crowd and says, "It is now time to deal with the consequences." Agito shouts to all those present that they have heard the truth. He declares that Samoa's involvement in corruption is a matter of extreme shame and offers his sincere apologies. However, to prevent the incident from damaging the credibility of the Burgo faith, everyone there will be promoted to the 2nd layer. Excited, the people in the audience begin to celebrate. Agito then says that everyone should thank Kyo, who after all was the one who cornered Father Samoa. A great wave of applause is directed at Asai. Ajito also thanks the young man and says he will reward him later, before slowly withdrawing from the arena to our hero. However, Ajito seems to be a swindler on a much higher level than Samoa.
Amidst the excited crowd, the girl in simple robes observes the scene and thinks that she will need to thank the boy later.
A few hours later, Ajito is finishing his report on the incident, reinforcing that it was resolved thanks to a single follower. He concludes that if the discovery had been delayed, the Burgo Church's reputation could have been seriously shaken. Elsewhere, mysterious individuals discuss that while what happened with Samoa is terrible, the conduct of the follower who exposed him was excellent and should serve as a model. Ajito replies that he already had that in mind, and for that reason has an interesting proposal for the boy. Meanwhile, our protagonist climbs a huge staircase guarded by two men.
This time, he wears a necklace with the Roman numeral 5 and walks through a wooded part of the grounds.
He never imagined he would be promoted straight to the 5th layer, but he supposes it was to make an example of him. In any case, it is still a great turn of events. The hero arrives at a beautiful building and enters, announcing his presence. Ajito is there and greets him with a smile. Kiyosuke approaches, thanking him for the promotion. Ajito says it is only natural for a follower who has proven himself worthy. Asai still can't get a read on the man, but he knows he gives off a different energy than Samoa. The long-haired man says there is one more piece of news he would like to share. Surprised, Kiyosuke asks what it is. Ajito reveals that thanks to the recent event, it has been decided that the young man will be given the opportunity to meet Claudia. Kiyosuke is shocked by this information, as he never imagined it would happen so quickly. To control himself, the boy clenches his fist and says it will be a great honor. With a smile, he happily accepts the offer. Iwako Hide is shocked by the news. During the group video call, Ingolf confirms that the reincarnated Kiyoichiro has been defeated, and Claudia adds that his presence there is definitive proof. Still, Ingolf never imagined she would be capable of such an act. With an awkward smile, the priestess apologizes, but points out that the result was satisfactory as they got rid of a troublesome enemy. Inwardly, however, Ingolf is furious with Claudia as he now knows she was the one who burned down his hometown. As the conversation continues, Nathaniel observes everyone with a suspicious expression. Iwako, still shaken by Kyoichiro's death, falls to his knees, realizing that with this, all of his problems have been solved at once. Claudia points out that all obstacles have been removed, and informs Nathaniel that they will soon need to discuss the divine gift ceremony. Ingolf watches her carefully, wondering what this ceremony could be. Nathaniel agrees, stating that since it is very important, they should discuss the details again at their next meeting. After the video call, Ingolf calls Kiyosuke to relay the information.
He questions whether it is a good idea for the young man to remain undercover, warning that Claudia might find out about his recognition blocking magic.
Surprised, Kiyosuke asks if his rival is genuinely worried about him, and with a smile tells him not to worry, as he has been honing his magic ever since he went to Germany. Ingolf insists that he be extremely cautious, as it seemed Nathaniel and Claudia were plotting something, especially when they mentioned the ceremony.
Isai promises to stay on guard and says he'll call later, now genuinely suspicious of Claudia's plans.
Meanwhile, at the Tower of the Faithful, Kiyosuke finally reaches the temple on the 7th and final layer. According to Ajito, he has 3 days until his meeting with Claudia, so he needs to use this time to confirm his suspicions. Soon, he notices a familiar presence and remarks that she has saved him the trouble of looking for her. Hiding behind a pillar is Shirado Yuki. In a low voice, she tells him he's standing out too much and asks him to follow her. The two ascend to a tall, isolated tower to keep the conversation short. Kiyosuke gets straight to the point, asking if she had anything to do with the hypnosis spell Claudia used on Ingolf. Shirad's expression changes upon hearing the question. Kiyosuke explains his reasoning. The spell used on Ingolf was incomplete, and Claudia isn't the type to make that kind of mistake. Therefore, the only person who could have interfered was Shirado, which confused him as she was supposedly on Claudia's side. The young woman begins to answer, saying she doesn't want to let Kiyoichiro die again. Her gaze fills with a deep sorrow, making Asai even more curious. Then she raises her arm, and the protagonist's eyes widen as he sees a mark glowing like a flame on her skin. Ki vaguely remembers the mark, 20 years ago. A little girl was being attacked by monsters when she awakened her power, but unable to control it, she went berserk. As fate would have it, she possessed the same time attribute as him. The use of so much power took a heavy toll on her inexperienced body. To prevent the energy from destroying her, Kiyoichiro decided to absorb the power himself. As he held her in his arms, he saw that the child had barely survived, but a red mark had been left on her arm. So, Shirado was that little girl. She continues, explaining that as soon as she regained consciousness, she was accused of being a criminal who had betrayed her comrades. As Kiyoichiro had also been blamed for the dungeon disaster, deep down, however, she knew her savior was incapable of such atrocities and decided to get close to Claudia, hoping to uncover the truth. Shirado dedicated herself completely, and after 10 years, she finally earned Claudia's trust enough to hear the truth from the priestess's own lips. Later, after the incident with Rei Ruaki, she was ordered to find the current Masato Kyoiro. At first, she doubted he could have been reincarnated, but while he was training in Germany, Shira contacted Asahi Karen.
When Karen described Asayosuke's personality, it all clicked. Shirado was certain it was her savior, as he was exactly like the Kyoto she had known. She states that she is only alive thanks to him, and thanks him from the bottom of her heart. With a calm smile, Asai asks if that's the whole truth. That child had believed in Masato Kyoto for 20 years. Seeing him as the embodiment of a hero, that's why she decides to tell him everything. Shirado was able to see the worst possible future, and he is the only one who can change that fate. Placing a hand over her heart, she asks him to lend her his strength, so that together they can save the world from the divine gift ceremony orchestrated by Claudia. Kyosuke asks if Shirado was able to see the future. With a surprised expression, he seems to have an idea of what's going on. The girl says she used time magic and came back from the future, and that in that timeline, the world is controlled by Claudia. If things continue as they are, all that awaits the world is deep despair. To change that, she needs Kyoichiro's help. Sweating, he repeats the terrifying idea of a world controlled by Claudia. In that future, even Asai ends up dead and Shirado is left completely devastated. But at the moment of the hero's death, something happens. He uses his void magic to unleash a regression power and asks Shirado to use it to prevent this desperate future. And so, she absolutely refuses to let all that chaos come to pass. Asai asks if the cause of all this is the divine gift ritual Claudia plans to perform. Shirado explains that at the hands of the monsters Claudia summons, the calamity beasts, thousands of people lose their lives. Shocked, Kyosuke's eyes widen as he repeats the name of the beasts, because 20 years ago, there was a monster that was impossible to defeat. In the end, the enemy had to be sealed in a dungeon. That monster was a calamity beast. With these incredibly powerful beasts under her control, Claudia managed to rewrite the entire structure of the world. All who opposed her were defeated, leaving only her obedient followers alive. Now, the protagonist understands the blonde woman's ambition, but she was supposed to be a hero to this world. The hero asks if she has decided to throw away her benevolent facade. Shirado says yes, and at that exact moment, something catches the protagonist's attention. Someone appears descending from the top of the bell and reveals their identity, looking Kyosuke in the eyes. It's the girl who was wearing humble clothes earlier. Shirado explains that she found Isha earlier and let her handle the information both inside and outside the tower. But until then, Asai believed the girl wanted to save her hometown and her family. However, that was a lie. As Claudia had murdered her family and everyone in her village, this gigantic tower that the woman built was in fact where Isha's village used to be. The blonde transformed the town into a place to gather her followers. And because of that, the girl lost people who were extremely precious to her. That's why she will never be able to forgive that terrible villain. If Claudia isn't stopped, another tragedy as great as this one could happen again. That woman doesn't care in the slightest about how many people will lose their lives. So Asa also needs Kyosuke's help to stop this monster. All the evidence shows that the enemy is already clear. Therefore, Kyosuke agrees that Claudia's scheme must be stopped. But more than that, he shares the same sentiment as Isha. He will never be able to forgive Claudia. The two young women look proudly at their new ally. But there's one thing he needs to know. If they kill Claudia, will the ritual be stopped? Shirado explains that unfortunately, no, because Claudia intends to summon the monsters using the power she absorbed from her elite followers. If that power is released, the ritual will still happen even if Claudia is killed. Kyosuke already figured as much, because if it were that easy, his future self would have succeeded. However, there is a way to succeed. Claudia's powers are being amplified by an object. If this object is destroyed, they can likely stop the ritual. From 4 failed timelines, this is the only concrete clue she has finally obtained. The key is the object kept at the top of the cathedral, but it is protected by an extremely powerful barrier. The advantage the 3 of them have now is that he is already on the 7th layer and has a meeting scheduled with Claudia. If it's possible to neutralize her during the meeting, perhaps Shirado and Isha can destroy the object while it's vulnerable. But there's a big problem with this plan. There are other priests and guards present in the meeting chamber, so they will need to go unnoticed. There's also a critical issue. Shirito's regression ability is reaching its limit, and the range to which she can return is getting shorter. This time she barely managed to return to the moment before meeting him, which means this is probably the last and only chance the 3 of them will have. The hero closes his eyes, gathering all his faith in himself. If the 3 of them fail the mission, the world will fall into Claudia's evil clutches. But our hero is determined to stop Claudia, no matter the cost. He will not allow things to happen as she plans again. This is without a doubt humanity's last chance. If they fail, what awaits them is the worst possible future. That's why our hero is determined to stop Claudia's plans, no matter the cost. During the night, a light mist covers the tower as someone sneaks through the shadows, infiltrating the location. The 3 heroes descend a hidden staircase and arrive at Shirado's secret hideout. The place is filled with information. Everything she managed to gather over so many resets. First, Shirado decides to tell them what she witnessed in the 4 timelines.
In the first world, she learned about Claudia's true objective to use the ritual to summon the beasts of calamity. It was in this first timeline that Kiyosuke gifted her the power to turn back time. In the second, Shirato tried to stop Claudia's ambition, but it wasn't that simple. She managed to catch her enemy off guard and deliver a mortal blow, but things still didn't work out. The woman didn't give up and advanced toward Shirato. Her mana went wild, and the beasts of calamity still manifested, proving that even if Claudia is killed, the ritual is activated by another mechanism. In the third timeline, she failed to find the object that amplifies Claudia's powers. In the fourth, she was able to track it down, but not figure out how to destroy it. Shirato desperately wanted to change the outcome, but she couldn't.
Forced to watch the same hopeless future over and over again with a hopeful expression, she looks at her partners.
Despite all the defeats, there were also many gains, such as meeting Isha. Even the fact that they have a meeting with Claudia now is thanks to her. The exposure of the corrupt acts on the first layer was Isha's doing. Creating the opening for all of this to happen,
She was the one responsible for paving the way for the young man, including the fact that a high priest was on the first layer at that exact moment.
reflecting on it, Asai comes to the conclusion that without these events, none of this would have been possible. With the efforts of his companions, everything worked out in the end. Shirato Sayuki used everything she could to create the current situation, and she probably saw more despair and hardship than she told the other two. In the first timeline, the protagonist asked her to prevent despair in the future, and ever since then, she has taken that task extremely seriously.
In any case, Asia says the three of them need to stop Claudia's ritual. Destroying the object that amplifies her power is non-negotiable.
To do that, they need Kiosk to neutralize Claudia during the meeting.
Only then will the barrier protecting the object collapse. Shirato has already collected all the information on the cathedral's layout, so Issa will be able to get to the artifact.
But it won't be easy to neutralize Claudia while all the other priests are present. That's why Kioski will need to create a specific spell, one capable of changing the future, no matter how rotten it has become. While the three youths are talking, Claudia is in her room. The woman realizes that the mana needed to summon the Beast of Calamity will soon be gathered. But before that, there are a few things that will serve as entertainment. The three heroes prepare for the next day, which will be crucial. Kioski tells Shirato not to worry about the preparations. He has been refining the image of the spell in his mind for a long time and has already mastered it. Smiling, the girl says she'd like to thank him. And the young man replies that he wants to thank her too, because she kept repeating her actions over and over, even while facing a completely hopeless future. He knows how lonely it is to fight while knowing the future. The hero trusted her in the first timeline, and the young woman found a way to carry that trust forward. So yes, he is very grateful to Shiedo and wants to live up to that trust. With a firm voice, the hero thanks her, calling her by her full name, Shiato Sayuki. This makes her blush a little, igniting a flame of hope in her spirit and leaving her emotional. Concerned, Kioski asks if there's a problem.
With teary eyes, the young woman says it's just strange to hear him call her by her full name.
Holding out her hand, she says it would be better if from now on he just called her Sayuki. Smiling, Kioski says he will. He takes the girl's hand, saying the two of them will save the future together. Smiling back, Sayuki agrees, filling with perseverance. Suddenly, Issa appears, breaking the mood between the two. Sayuki tries to explain, saying nothing was happening, but Isha cuts her off, announcing that she has already memorized the entire layout and patterns of the cathedral. The three of them are truly prepared for the final battle. Kioski was tasked with holding off Claudia, while Suki and Isha will destroy the object when they get an opening. The three put their hands together heroically, deciding they will win no matter what. Soon, the day of the meeting with Claudia arrives. The guards allow Asai to pass. Nervously, the boy wonders about his partner's situation. By now, they should have reached the right floor without any trouble. The young man hadn't expected Aisha to be able to use long-range communication magic as well, something that will be very useful. He is almost at the meeting chamber and is counting on both of them. As soon as he enters the place, he observes a long-haired man. It's Ajito, who says he was waiting for the hero. The man signals for the boy to proceed. With a determined expression, Kioska continues on his way and is now officially inside the place he needed to be. Several priests are standing guard as expected. And there, finally, our hero comes face to face with Claudia. Determined, our hero thinks that he cannot let the opportunities Suki created go to waste, facing the woman responsible for all his suffering. Various thoughts run through his mind. Claudia, on the other hand, displays a friendly smile and gazes at him with her deep blue eyes. One of the guards notices her silence and asks if everything is all right, but the woman replies that it's nothing. It's happening exactly as the boy predicted. His perception blocking spell makes him look like a completely different person from Asike.
Although Claudia is capable of seeing through the disguise, it will take some time. In the future, Sayuki saw the hero use this spell twice.
And on both occasions, it took Claudia about 5 minutes to break through it. The activation condition for the spell he is about to use on her requires a certain amount of time to pass after making eye contact with the target. Therefore, Kioski just needs to activate the new key spell before Claudia realizes his true identity. Meanwhile, Sayuki prepares to do her part. She peeks out and observes that the security on the upper floors hasn't been reduced, so there's no other choice but to take down the soldiers. The young woman remains hidden as the men make their rounds. The time for the changing of the guard arrives. The guard taking over the post is relaxed, but not for long. Suddenly, an explosion on the wall causes a loud bang. Someone has just broken into the place, and upon arriving, immediately takes down one of the soldiers. Surprised, the other guard's eyes widen. It's a little past 100 in the afternoon. The ideal time for the girls to move while the soldiers are distracted with a fixed gaze and extreme determination. Sayuki begins to attack the unsuspecting guards. The brilliant aura coursing through her body shows her sheer will to win. One of the guards orders the others to call for Lady Claudia immediately. But as two soldiers are distracted trying to follow the order, someone approaches from behind. It's Issa who arrives at the perfect moment and strikes them both at once, preventing them from alerting their boss. After the successful ambush, the girls managed to take down all the soldiers. The information Sayuki acquired was truly worth it. Now, the two of them need to wait for the moment Kioski manages to seal Claudia so they can destroy the object, as only then will the great barrier blocking entry to the room fall. Sayuki closes her eyes, sending a telepathic confirmation to her partner. Kioski receives the message at the exact moment a priest is bestowing a blessing upon him, with a cross resting on his head. He raises his eyes, aware that the progress of the plan now depends on him. The girls were excellent in completing the first condition, and he has no intention of falling short. According to Sayuki's information, the meeting always begins with a ceremonial speech from the priest of the 6th layer. However, this is just a front. Claudia's real objective is different. The priest of the 7th layer, Sinus Lester, is using this interval to measure the protagonist's total mana. This meeting isn't a casual encounter, but rather a way for Claudia to harvest magical power from exceptional followers. If the boy didn't meet the standards, everything would be cancelled immediately. However, that is not the case. As soon as he quantifies the boy's mana, Sinus Lester is impressed by the amount of power, as he has never seen such a powerful follower before. Soon after, the priest sends a telepathic message to Claudia, warning that they need to ensure the boy's safety. This brings a sly grin to our hero's face. And with that, the second condition of the plan is complete. Unable to contain herself, Claudia bursts into laughter, shocking the priests around her. She says she finally understands the source of that feeling of unease. As she approaches the protagonist, she declares that Kyoichiro is in fact still alive. The other priests are bewildered to hear this information. The recognition blocking spell quickly begins to fail much sooner than the hero had expected. The woman grabs the boy's chin and, staring at him with a sinister gaze, says she can see him clearly now. She adds that with this absurd amount of mana, she can also tell for certain which spell he is using. This leaves her impressed, as she believed the young man had died in the battle against Ingolf. The blonde woman concludes that there's much more going on, but says she has no time to waste. As long as he is killed right here, there will be nothing to worry about. Sayuki despairs upon realizing Kyoichiro is in a tight spot, but he remains serious and focused. Just as he had imagined, the cautious woman would have her priests attack first, and as expected, Claudia orders the boy to be eliminated. Holding a syringe, one of the priests reveals their plan. One by one, he injects the other priests with the needle's contents. Performance-enhancing drugs made by Rei Luoxi. With all her subordinates empowered, Kuchiro wouldn't stand a chance. But the boy is not willing to accept this fate. Using his energy, he launches several shards that strike everyone there, leaving Claudia dumbfounded. This time, everything is going exactly as the protagonist planned. Finally, his body is ready for the main strike. A violet aura begins to engulf the entire area, striking the remaining priests. Claudia watches, dumbstruck, at this display of power, and tries to shield her face with her hands. The spell has created a space completely outside the real world, a place where it's impossible to interact with or draw power from the outside, like a true bird trapped in a cage. Cornered, Claudia asks what the boy was trying to do by creating such a spell. Kyoichiro confesses that he will destroy the object, amplifying her mana, and in doing so, stop the manifestation of the calamity monsters. While she is sealed, the barrier protecting the object should disappear. Realizing the young man knows all these details, Claudia can't hide the look of despair on her face. But the woman retorts, saying that Kyoiro is also trapped there. So, how could he destroy the object under these conditions? However, as soon as she asks the question, the blonde woman's expression changes. With a sarcastic smile, Kuchiro says that it seems she has figured it out. Clenching her fists in anger, the woman asks if the boy has a partner helping him. If that's the case, it makes perfect sense that the boy knows about the object and has left that part of the plan to his accomplice. With no reason to hide his true intentions, the protagonist reveals that his goal is to prevent the summoning of the calamity beasts. With a firm voice, Kuchiro shouts that she will remain trapped until the object is completely destroyed. Claudia begins to reflect on a girl who is always nearby, keeping an eye on her movements as her assistant. She has been missing for a few days, And that time, the priestess did everything possible to ensure the situation ended with the death of either Ingolf or Kyoiro. There should never have been a scenario where both of them survived, unless someone interfered with her hypnosis. Therefore, it all makes sense. Sayuki is Kyoiro's accomplice. Claudia is disappointed as she had high expectations for the boy. If his temporal power had been fully awakened, the young man would have made an excellent puppet. But now he is completely useless. Honestly, it feels like someone stole the harvest before she could reap it. The blonde woman begins to concentrate magic in her hand, pulling out a golden sword and saying she will kill him and escape with this special weapon she has just summoned. As Suki had mentioned, Claudia has been harvesting the mana of her most talented followers during the gatherings. So, the woman is trying to drain all of Kyoichiro's mana to try and escape. She will do anything to end his life and flee. Claudia begins her attack, but Kyoiro's main objective is to keep her trapped. As the woman unleashes several strikes toward the protagonist, the boy simply dodges them all, his gaze remaining steady. According to Sayuki, even if Claudia died, the summoning of the Calamity Beasts would still happen. Kyoichiro swiftly moves behind his opponent. He knows he absolutely cannot let Claudia die. His job now is to contain her attacks while Suki and Isha destroy the object. As if in a dance, he does everything he can to match his opponent's movements and avoid all her strikes. Provocatively, the hero says the blonde's attacks are too easy to dodge. Suddenly, a crossbow appears. Summoned by Claudia's magic, she starts firing repeatedly at her enemy, her eyes blazing with fury. One of the arrows comes within an inch of hitting Kyoiro's neck, but he manages to dodge at the last second and observes the projectiles. The crossbow bolt is imbued with hypnosis, the same spell used on Ingolf before. Laughing maniacally, the blonde says that if the boy is hit by one of the arrows, it'll be all over for him. Indeed, a hypnotic arrow is a real pain to deal with, but the boy won't give up and will keep dodging. If she thinks she can hit him, she'll have to try harder. The blonde pauses and says she wants to tell him something interesting. She reveals that she has other capable assistants besides Sayuki. There's someone she told about the object, and he should know what that means. Meanwhile, Isha points in a certain direction, saying she's found what they were looking for. It's the mana amplification object, a huge system of pulleys. Hurriedly, Sayuki knows the two of them need to destroy that thing. But suddenly, a person appears between the girls and the object. Anyone who steps into this area must be eliminated. Those are Lady Claudia's orders. Ajito Norman is the guardian of the object, and he won't let it be destroyed. With a furious gaze, the man asks why Sayuki, who is supposed to be Claudia's assistant, is acting against her orders. But the young woman says she owes him no explanation. Just as the girl had already seen in the future, Norman is Claudia's true right-hand man, and if the heroines want to destroy the object, they'll have to get through him first. At first, Ajito laments the girl's betrayal, but then says it's actually something to be celebrated, as it's a way to prove who truly deserves to be by Claudia's side. Smiling, Sayuki says she couldn't care less about that nonsense. But Ajito replies that even with her out of the picture, he already has a reason to fight because when he was a child, his parents treated him extremely poorly, and the person who saved him was the kind Claudia. Isha tries to convince him that the woman was only trying to gather children with high abilities, not save him. But Norman says that Claudia was his light and taught him that power was necessary to survive in this world. Ever since she saved him, Ajito swore complete loyalty and wanted to stay as close as possible to help her. But the priestess started keeping Sayuki closer just because the girl had a special time-related attribute. Because of that, Sayuki was always in his way. So this opportunity to get rid of her must be divine providence. In disbelief, Isha says that Claudia just wants to dominate the world and summon the Calamity Beasts. But surprisingly, Ajito asks what the problem with that is, as the realization of the woman's ideals is where true salvation lies. Sayuki asks Isha not to try to convince him of anything anymore. With a firm gaze, the girl says that the two of them will never let Norman stand in their way. Ajito Norman is nowhere near being a normal priest. His position, overseeing the 5th layer of the First Division, was just camouflage. His true identity is that of Claudia's right-hand man. The blonde entrusted him with the task of protecting the object, as the man is very skilled in combat. And in fact, before regressing, the girl was killed by this very same man in other timelines. To Ajito, Claudia is like a goddess, and he is the executive chosen by her to carry out her will. Therefore, he will eliminate the girls to complete his mission. The two of them are on guard. Isha, who holds a deep resentment for Claudia, will not accept losing to a lunatic who worships that woman. Norman is surprised to hear that Isha is one of the survivors of the village's destruction, which happened 10 years ago. With hatred in her eyes, the girl asks the reason for his surprise and warns him that she doesn't want any of his pity. But Ajito replies that he feels no pity for having lived through everything she has. The young woman should feel lucky. Hearing those cold and absurd words, both girls are shocked. The priest claims that the will of a god is always right, no matter the situation. If Claudia decided she should wipe out Isha's hometown, then that was divine guidance. And if the girl was able to witness divine guidance up close, it could be nothing but luck. her voice filled with hatred. Issa tells the man to shut up.
Quickly drawing her dagger from its sheath, she says with tears in her eyes that she will never forgive him for mocking her past. As he also draws his sword, Ajito retorts that it's just a difference in perspective, and that he was simply preaching the teachings.
Just as Claudia proclaims, the world truly needs purification. The priest points his weapon at Sayuki, who in turn says the man has been completely blinded by his devotion, and that there's no way the two of them can lose this battle. Provocatively, Ajito tells them they should try. As a violet aura envelops him, he declares that it will be impossible. Suddenly, Norman vanishes from their sight in the blink of an eye.
Just as Sayuki had warned, Ajito uses abilities like teleportation magic and stealth mirage to set up surprise attacks.
Sayuki possesses a rare temporal attribute, but it is currently sealed and cannot be used. This means there is no way to block this attack. Ajito charges forward at full speed, his weapon aimed at the girl. Asa notices the enemy's advance and her eyes widen. But the instant the sword passes by the girl's body, she dodges, leaving Norman utterly shocked. She managed to dodge an attack from a perfect blind spot. Ajito had never used stealth mirage in front of her before, so he wonders how she was able to dodge. Then something from behind catches his attention. The girl's aura is golden. This can only be time magic. Apparently, the young woman has learned to use it, the legendary attribute that should not belong to a sinner. However, the heroine demonstrates that she has mastered her technique, dodging every blow. Sayuki inherited from Kyoiro not only the power to turn back time, but also a technique called minuscule vision, which allows her to read 1 second into the future. For now, she can't see as far ahead as Kyoichiro, but even so, this magic is insanely powerful in combat. Isha asks Sayuki to maintain long-distance communication so they can coordinate their attack in real time. Sayuki agrees, her eyes fixed on their opponent.
Ajay reflects that he heard Masato Kyoiro also use time magic and could predict some abilities.
Therefore, there's a high chance that Sayuki also possesses similar powers. Sayuki warns her partner, the blow is coming from the left.
And just like that, Isha manages to dodge the sword strike perfectly.
Norman realizes that Sayuki is also predicting his movements and concludes that the two must be communicating somehow. They may not be superior in brute force, but by using communication, it's possible for them to dodge all of his attacks. At first, Sayuki was worried about separating their group from Kyoichiro's. But she realized that there are things that can only be accomplished if they are the ones to do it. With her gaze fixed on the enemy, the heroine is completely focused. She communicates to her partner that Ajito is about to retreat. With wind magic, Isha won't let her enemy escape. Surprised, the priest realizes that Shuki can now even predict the direction in which he will dodge. The man raises his sword to defend against the magic which comes at him like a whirlwind. Upon hitting him, the attack causes a massive explosion on the spot. The blade of his sword falls to the ground, broken. Now Ajito understands why Claudia always wanted the girl nearby. Showing a shining ring, the man says that their teamwork is nothing more than an obstacle. Sayuki's gaze hardens on her opponent.
She knows that this ring unleashes its user's latent powers, and Norman is determined to serve alongside his goddess to become the one closest to her. The priest's body begins to transform monstrously. The pair watches the dark metamorphosis as he transforms into a terrible monster.
Ajito screams that his goddess will look only at him. The priest's hands are now sharp claws. He moves his arms, breaking the surrounding walls and throwing debris in the girl's direction. Ajito is struck by his enormous power, exactly as Claudia had promised. The monster then declares that he will crush the fools who dared to defy the divine will. Sayuki asks if her partner is ready because the real fight begins now. The ring Claudia gave Ajito has transformed him into a monster, and this is where the real battle will begin. The creature shouts that his master is very close to creating a new world, and that he wants to see paradise with his own eyes.
Anyone who opposes her will be destroyed.
That is his mission, especially Shirato, who was part of his master's inner circle and yet had the courage to betray her. Bekito will be the one to judge the traitor. Quickly, the monster charges toward the girls. The shockwave from its movement alone causes a huge impact. If the blow hits them directly, they'll be finished. Issa tries to find her balance to get into an attack stance because since the enemy's body has grown, his target area is also larger. The young woman goes all out, charging at him while preparing a spell. However, Ajito readies his arm to defend and places it in front of the attack, absorbing the impact. Surprised, Issa realizes the monster managed to block the spell with its bare hands. Sayuki, who was watching everything, also can't hide her shock. Suddenly, one of the pillars in the area begins to collapse. Sayuki realizes the enormous structure is coming toward her. It was Ajito who tore it out and is now using it as a weapon. The monster manages to hit both girls. After completing the attack, he rests the pillar on the ground again, as if it were super light. Norman swells with pride as he notes the extent of the power Claudia has entrusted to him. Absurd strength and a resistance like steel. This is the level of power Claudia can grant. Even if his opponent uses time magic, she won't be able to defeat someone who has been blessed by a goddess. Sayuki managed to prevent the blow from being fatal thanks to her minuscule vision.
But with the ring, Ajito's power is truly insane. The monster's durability is also difficult to deal with.
Even Isha's wind magic barely managed to scratch it. Sayuki then looks at her partner, who is sitting in a corner, looking gravely injured after the blow from the pillar. She gets up and starts moving toward the enemy. Confident, the young woman knows there are still ways to win, mainly because of what Koichiro told them.
Ajito is surprised to see the girl is still standing and doesn't understand why she is fighting so bravely. Enraged, Shira replies that it's obvious. She wants to stop Claudia's plan.
Norman retorts that this is exactly what he can't understand. There's no reason to reject Claudia since she is a goddess. But with a firm voice, Sayuki replies that she is not a goddess. Claudia has already hurt thousands of people and wants to hurt even more. Furthermore, the very position she holds is wrong. She claimed all she wanted was to create a safe and stable life for people. But she only took her position by betraying one of her partners.
Someone so corrupt should never be called a goddess.
Ajito begins to understand that the reason Sayuki is so obsessed with defeating Claudia is because of Masato Kyoiro. But to him, that shouldn't matter. He was just a man who died. She and the girl whose village was destroyed are no different. They should stop clinging to their useless pasts and look toward the wonderful future Claudia is creating. If the two of them must be a sacrifice to achieve this ideal, then they should feel proud. But if they wish to reject the truth, so be it. Since that is their choice, they will both die here. Sayuki says that for someone who talks so much about the future, his speech is extremely shallow. Ajito doesn't understand what she means. She explains that the priest isn't trying to see any perspective but Claudia's. The past people carry and the future they fight for. None of it is taken into account.
Both warriors have lived through moments of despair, and because of that, they are striving to break through this barrier.
They will not lose to someone who just keeps repeating that everything is for Claudia's will. Sayuki's speech enrages Ajito. The monster begins to bellow that their despair and suffering are worthless, and that he will personally shut their irritating mouths with his own hands. At that very moment, Issa throws a dagger. Juki catches it in midair and points it at the horrendous creature advancing on her. Seeing his opponent is using a weapon, the monster says it's just a cheap trick and that nothing can stop him. As the enemy advances, Shirato remains firm and courageous. She dodges swiftly and appears behind Ajito, preparing a mortal blow with her dagger. As she closes in, the girl channels energy into her strike, hitting the monster's back with all her might. The priest feels the impact, but quickly regains his footing and tries to grab her, saying that a simple dagger will do no harm. Suddenly, as he moves, the monster feels something strange. Sayuki lands firmly on the ground. Norman's body begins to revert, returning to its true form. In her attack, the girl had used a temporal magic that caused this reversion. The spell is called Inverted Fate. It manipulates causality, dragging the target back to its previous state. In other words, Ajito was reverted to the moment before he put on the ring. The man's eyes reveal an immense hatred, and his plan is now to hide using Stealth Mirage. However, an emerald energy starts to close in on his head. Isha's wind magic reaches him swiftly. The villain realizes the two had planned this all along. Isha advances on the man who no longer possesses an extremely resistant body, and just as they promised, they will not lose to someone like him. After taking the coordinated blows, the enemy falls to the ground. With his body wounded and the man unconscious, Sayuki repeats that the priest had only ever looked toward Claudia. Someone of his ilk should never try to preach about the past or the future. Meanwhile, at the portal Kyoiro created, Claudia feels her energy shift drastically. The woman knows what this horrible sensation means. It seems Sayuki and Aisha have accomplished their goal. The mana-amplifying object has been destroyed. Now there is no longer any reason for the hero to hold back. Leave a comment below, rating this story from 0 to 10. I don't know what score to give this mana. Story.